person sitting next to you on the bus this morning might have spent last night watching someone die for entertainment. Your neighbor, your colleague, maybe even someone in your own family could be part of a network that treats human suffering like a pay-per-view sporting event. You think I'm being dramatic, talking about urban legends and internet folklore, but I've seen the application forms. I know how they recruit people, because I filled one out myself. It started when I was unemployed and desperate. 6 months out of university with a degree in psychology and no prospects beyond 0-hour contracts at call centers. My student loan was hanging over me like a sword. Rent was due, and my parents kept asking when I was going to get a proper job. The kind of desperation that makes you consider things you'd normally never touch. I was browsing job sites when I found the posting. It wasn't on the usual platforms, not Indeed or Reed or any of the mainstream ones. This was on a forum I'd stumbled across while looking for freelance work, the kind of place where people advertise cash-in-hand jobs that don't ask too many questions about your employment history. The post was vague but intriguing. Remote work, flexible hours, good pay for the right candidate. It mentioned psychological assessment and evaluation work, which seemed perfect for someone with my background. The pay was mentioned as being well above average, around £40 an hour for part-time work. For someone living on beans on toast and instant noodles, it sounded too good to be true. The application process was unusual. Instead of a CV and cover letter, they wanted you to fill out what they called a psychological profile assessment. Questions about your tolerance for disturbing content, your ability to remain objective in stressful situations, your views on personal privacy and consent. They asked about your internet usage, whether you'd ever accessed the dark web, how comfortable you were with cryptocurrency transactions. I should have been suspicious, but I was broke and desperate. I answered honestly about most things, maybe embellished my experience with difficult psychological cases from my university placements. The questions about disturbing content I assumed were standard for psychology work. You often have to deal with traumatic material when working with victims of abuse or violence. They got back to me within days, which was faster than any legitimate employer I'd contacted. The response came from an encrypted email service I'd never heard of, with instructions to download a specific browser and access a website through something called the Tor network. They explained this was for security purposes, to protect client confidentiality and ensure the privacy of sensitive psychological assessments. The website looked professional enough. Clean design, corporate language about psychological services and remote consultation work. There was information about their client base, wealthy individuals seeking discreet psychological profiling of people in their lives, ex-partners, business rivals, employees they suspected of disloyalty. The kind of grey area work that exists in the spaces between legal and illegal. My job, they explained, would be to observe individuals through various means and provide psychological assessments of their behavior, mental state, and likely responses to different situations. The pay was excellent because the work required complete discretion and a strong stomach for morally ambiguous situations. The first assignment seemed straightforward enough. I was given access to what they called an observation session, essentially a live video feed of someone's home. A woman in her 30s, living alone in what looked like a converted flat in London. The feed showed multiple angles of her living space, apparently from hidden cameras that had been installed without her knowledge. My job was to observe her routine over the course of a week and write a detailed psychological profile. Her habits, her emotional responses to different situations, her vulnerabilities and strengths. They were particularly interested in how she might react to unexpected stress or threatening situations. The money was deposited into my account within hours of accepting the assignment. Real money, more than I'd seen in months. Enough to pay rent, buy proper food, maybe even start paying down some of my student debt. All for what seemed like glorified people watching. The woman's routine was mundane. She worked from home, had video calls with colleagues, ate meals while watching Netflix, went to bed around 11 each night. I took notes on her behavior, her apparent emotional state, the way she responded to work stress or personal phone calls. It felt invasive, but I told myself this was just advanced market research or corporate intelligence gathering. After a week, I submitted my report and received payment immediately. The feedback was positive, and they offered me another assignment. This time the pay was higher, the observation period longer. I was building a reputation within their system, proving myself reliable and thorough. The assignments gradually became more intensive. Instead of just observing people in their homes, I was given access to feeds from multiple locations. Someone's workplace, their gym, their regular cafe. The psychological profiles became more detailed, focusing on specific vulnerabilities and potential breaking points. How someone might react to blackmail, what would cause them to have a mental breakdown, which family members they cared about most. I started to realize that these weren't just psychological assessments for corporate clients. The level of detail they wanted, the focus on vulnerabilities and stress responses, suggested something more sinister. But by then, I was earning more money than most of my university friends with proper jobs. I'd moved to a better flat, bought new clothes, started paying off my debts properly for the first time since graduation. The rationalization was easy. I wasn't hurting anyone directly. I was just observing and writing reports. Whatever clients did with that information wasn't my responsibility. I was providing a professional service, using my psychology training for legitimate consultation work. The fact that it operated through the dark web was just about client privacy and commercial discretion. The breakthrough assignment changed everything. Instead of just observing someone's routine, I was given access to what they called an interactive session. The target was a man in his 40s, living alone in Birmingham. The setup was similar, hidden cameras throughout his flat, but this time there were other viewers logged into the session. I could see a chat sidebar where other people were commenting on what they were watching. At first, it seemed like professional colleagues sharing observations and insights. But as the session continued, the comments became more disturbing. People were making suggestions about what should happen next, placing what looked like bets on how the target would respond to different scenarios. Then the phone started ringing in the man's flat. He answered it, and I watched his face change from confusion to fear. He hung up quickly, but the phone rang again immediately. This pattern continued for nearly an hour. Phone calls that clearly distressed him, followed by brief periods of peace, then more calls. The people in the chat were reacting with excitement, commenting on his stress responses and psychological deterioration. I realized I wasn't just observing anymore. I was watching someone being deliberately tormented, and the psychological profile I'd been asked to create was being used to determine the most effective ways to break him down mentally. The next few hours were horrific. The phone calls escalated to sounds outside his flat, footsteps in the hallway, knocking on doors, car alarms going off in the street below. Each incident was clearly orchestrated based on the psychological weaknesses identified in profiles like the one I'd written. The man became increasingly paranoid and distressed, eventually barricading himself in his bedroom, while the chat exploded with commentary and what were clearly financial transactions. People were paying to watch this man's psychological torture and paying extra to suggest new ways to torment him. The amounts being discussed were substantial. Hundreds of pounds for specific requests, thousands for extended sessions. This wasn't corporate intelligence gathering. It was entertainment for people who enjoyed watching others suffer. I tried to close the browser, but found I couldn't log out of the session. A message appeared saying that all observers were required to complete the full assignment to receive payment. More disturbing was the implication that my participation was being recorded, and that leaving early would result in consequences for my future employment with the organization. So I watched. For another 6 hours, I watched as this man was systematically broken down through carefully orchestrated psychological pressure. The torment was designed using the same principles I'd learned in university: how to identify and exploit psychological vulnerabilities, how to create maximum distress through targeted manipulation. By morning, the man was catatonic with fear. He'd stopped responding to the phone calls and sounds outside his flat, just sitting in his bedroom staring at the wall. The chat had moved on to discussing how long it would take him to recover, whether he'd seek professional help, and how his mental state could be further exploited in future sessions. The payment for that assignment was more than I'd earned in the previous month combined. Along with the money came an invitation to become what they called a premium observer, with access to more exclusive content and higher paying assignments. The invitation mentioned that my psychological insights had been particularly valuable in designing effective torment strategies. I should have stopped then, should have deleted the browser, blocked the email addresses, pretended none of it had ever happened. But the money was addictive, and I'd already crossed lines I never thought I would. Each assignment pushed the boundaries a little further, normalized behavior that would have horrified me months earlier. The premium sessions were worse, much worse. Instead of just psychological torment, they escalated to physical interventions. Break-ins while people were away, designed to create paranoia and fear. Items moved or stolen to make targets question their own sanity. In extreme cases, actual physical harm, though this was presented as being carried out by independent contractors, rather than the organization itself. The worst part was how systematic it all was. They had psychological profiles on thousands of people, detailed vulnerability assessments that could be used to destroy someone's mental health with surgical precision. The observers weren't just paying to watch random suffering. They were commissioning bespoke psychological torture based on scientific principles of human behavior. And I was part of it. My psychology degree, the knowledge I'd gained studying human behavior and mental health, was being used to cause maximum psychological damage to innocent people. I was helping to turn human suffering into entertainment for people wealthy enough to pay for front row seats to someone else's destruction. The organization started offering me more than just observation work. They wanted me to help develop new techniques, to use my academic background to design more effective methods of psychological manipulation. The pay for this consultancy work was enormous. More money than most people earn in a year for work that could be done in a few hours. I told myself I was just providing academic insight, that I wasn't directly involved in implementing the techniques, but I knew exactly how my research was being used. Every principle of psychological pressure I explained, every vulnerability I identified, every technique I suggested would be used to torment real people for the entertainment of paying viewers. The money let me live a life I'd never imagined possible. Expensive flat in London, designer clothes, holidays abroad, meals at restaurants I'd only read about in magazines. My parents were proud of how successful I'd become, how quickly I'd turned my life around after university. Friends were envious of my apparent success in such a competitive field. But I couldn't sleep properly anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of the people I'd watched being tormented. The man in Birmingham was just the first. There had been dozens since then, each one carefully selected and systematically destroyed for the entertainment of people who treated human suffering like a particularly engaging video game. The organization's reach was vast. They had contacts in security companies who could install hidden cameras, telecommunications workers who could intercept phone calls, even people in local councils who could provide information about vulnerable individuals. What I'd stumbled into wasn't just a website. It was a network that extended into legitimate institutions and businesses. The viewers weren't just random perverts either. The amounts of money being spent suggested wealthy individuals, possibly including people in positions of power and influence. Politicians, business leaders, celebrities, anyone with enough money and moral flexibility to pay premium prices for customized human suffering. After nearly a year of this work, I started to receive different kinds of assignments. Instead of just observing existing targets, I was asked to identify potential new ones. People in my personal life who might be suitable for psychological profiling and eventual targeting. Friends, family members, former classmates, anyone who might provide entertaining content for the organization's clients. The requests came with substantial financial incentives, bonuses for successful recruitment, ongoing payments for providing personal information about potential targets, premium rates for people I had close access to. They were particularly interested in my family, specifically my younger sister, who was starting university and living alone for the first time. That's when I realized I'd become more than just an employee. I was part of the network now, expected to provide targets from my own life in exchange for continued financial support. The organization had gradually normalized increasingly extreme behavior, using financial incentives and the threat of exposure to ensure compliance. I tried to quit, sent an email saying I was no longer available for assignments, that I wanted to end my association with the organization. The response was swift and terrifying. They had detailed records of my involvement, including video evidence of my participation in the interactive sessions. They knew where I lived, where my family lived, details about my personal life that I'd never shared with anyone. The message was clear. I could continue working for them voluntarily, or I could become one of their targets. They had enough information about my psychological profile to design a torment program that would be perfectly calibrated to my specific vulnerabilities and fears. More concerning was the implication that they'd been profiling me from the beginning. My initial application, the gradual escalation of assignments, the financial dependency they'd created, it had all been carefully planned to ensure my compliance. I wasn't just an employee who'd stumbled into something dark. I was a target who'd been recruited and conditioned to participate in my own exploitation. I'm still working for them, still writing psychological profiles, still participating in interactive sessions, still helping to design new methods of psychological torture. The money continues to flow into my account, and I continue to live a life that looks successful and comfortable from the outside. But I know what I really am now. I'm not a successful psychology consultant or a remote work entrepreneur. I'm a collaborator in an industry that treats human suffering as entertainment. Someone who uses academic knowledge to help wealthy perverts torment innocent people for fun. And the worst part is that I can't be the only one. The organization is too large, too sophisticated, too well connected to rely on just a few recruited academics. There must be hundreds of people like me, qualified professionals who started with legitimate seeming work and gradually found themselves complicit in something monstrous. Your therapist, your university lecturer, your GP, any of them could be supplementing their income by helping to design psychological torture programs. The person who assessed your mental health, who has access to your vulnerabilities and fears, might be selling that information to people who want to use it against you. The next time you feel like someone's watching you, like someone knows more about your personal life than they should, like someone's deliberately trying to make you paranoid or distressed, you might not be imagining it. You might be someone's premium entertainment, carefully selected and systematically tormented by professionals who know exactly which psychological buttons to push. And somewhere, people are paying good money to watch it happen. Picture this. You're scrolling through your emails one morning and find an invitation to an exclusive event. Premium location, limited attendance, significant financial reward for participation. The kind of opportunity that seems too good to be true, but legitimate enough that you don't immediately delete it. Now picture discovering that the event isn't what you thought it was, and by the time you realize what you've agreed to, it's far too late to back out. I work in market research for a consultancy firm in Leeds. Nothing glamorous. Consumer surveys, focus groups, the occasional product launch analysis. The pay is decent enough, but it's the kind of job where you're always looking for ways to supplement your income. Freelance work, weekend surveys, anything that might add a few £100 to your monthly earnings. That's why the email caught my attention. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, mixed in with the usual spam and work correspondence. The subject line was simple enough. Research opportunity, exclusive participation required. The sender was someone called Dr. Sarah Chen from something called the Institute for Behavioral Studies. The email was professionally written, explaining that they were conducting a specialized research project on group dynamics and social behavior. They needed participants with specific qualifications, university educated, working in research or analysis, comfortable with technology and unconventional research methods. The compensation was substantial. £500 for a single evening's participation, with the possibility of ongoing work for suitable candidates. I looked up the Institute for Behavioral Studies online. They had a legitimate-looking website, published research papers, even a few academic staff profiles. Dr. Chen appeared to be a real person with proper credentials from Manchester University. Everything seemed above board, if a bit vague about the actual nature of the research. The application process was straightforward. Basic personal information, employment history, some questions about my comfort level with technology, and unusual research scenarios. They asked about my experience with online platforms, whether I'd used secure communication tools, how I felt about observing human behavior in controlled environments. Within a week, I received confirmation that I'd been selected for the study. The details were sparse but intriguing. I would need to attend a briefing session in Manchester, followed by the main research event later that evening. All travel expenses would be covered, plus the £500 participation fee. The only requirement was that I sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement before the briefing. The location was a serviced office building near Manchester city centre. Nothing unusual about that. Lots of research companies rent temporary spaces for focus groups and studies. I arrived on the specified date to find about 20 other people in the waiting area, all roughly my age and background, all looking slightly puzzled about what they'd signed up for. Dr. Chen turned out to be exactly as advertised. A professional academic in her 40s, well-spoken and authoritative. She explained that we would be participating in a study of group behavior and decision-making in high-pressure situations. The research involved observing and interacting with subjects in a controlled environment, measuring our responses to various scenarios. The technology component, she explained, was necessary for participant privacy and research integrity. We would be accessing the observation environment through a secure network, using encrypted connections to ensure anonymity. Each participant would be given a laptop with pre-installed software for the session. We were led to individual workstations in a larger room, each with a laptop and a set of instructions. The software we needed to use was something called Tor browser, which Dr. Chen explained was standard for research requiring participant anonymity. We would be accessing a private research platform that could only be reached through this secure network. The initial briefing made it sound like a sophisticated version of reality television. We would be observing people in various scenarios and making decisions about how situations should develop. Our choices would be aggregated with other participants to determine the direction of the research. It was described as a study of collective decision-making and moral reasoning under pressure. The platform, when we accessed it, looked professional enough. Clean interface, clear instructions, participant guidelines. We were told we would be observing subjects who had volunteered for a separate study and consented to being filmed. Our role was to vote on various scenarios and observe how different situations affected group dynamics. The first session seemed innocuous. We were watching what appeared to be a focus group. 8 people sitting around a table discussing consumer preferences. Our job was to vote on which topics the moderator should introduce next, how the discussion should be guided, what questions would be most revealing about group behavior. It felt like legitimate research, the kind of thing you might see in any market research facility across the country. The participants seemed natural, unaware they were being observed by external researchers. We made our votes through the platform interface, and the focus group moderator would adjust their questioning accordingly. After about an hour, Dr. Chen explained that the next phase would be more intensive. The subjects would be moved to individual observation rooms, where we could study their behavior in isolation. This was where the real research would begin, understanding how people behaved when they thought they were alone, versus how they acted in groups. The individual observation sessions were more uncomfortable. We were watching people in what looked like small windowless rooms, apparently unaware they were being filmed. The platform allowed us to vote on various environmental changes, adjusting lighting, temperature, introducing background noises. The idea was to measure stress responses and coping mechanisms. I started to feel uneasy about the whole thing. The people we were observing seemed genuinely distressed by some of the environmental changes. When we voted to increase the room temperature, we could see them becoming visibly uncomfortable. When background noise was introduced, they showed clear signs of agitation and confusion. Dr. Chen explained that this was normal for behavioral research. The subjects had consented to psychological stress testing as part of their participation agreement. What we were seeing was valuable data about human resilience and adaptation. The distress was temporary and carefully controlled to avoid lasting harm. But as the evening progressed, the scenarios became more extreme. We were voting on whether to restrict access to water, whether to introduce disturbing sounds, whether to dim the lights to near darkness. The people we were observing were showing increasing signs of panic and distress. The platform interface had evolved too. Instead of simple voting options, we were now bidding on scenarios using virtual credits. The higher the bid, the more likely our chosen option would be implemented. It had turned into a kind of auction system, with participants competing to direct the action. Some of the other participants seemed to be enjoying it. I could hear suppressed laughter from nearby workstations when particularly distressing scenarios were implemented. People were bidding aggressively on options that would cause maximum psychological pressure on the subjects. I tried to bid on less harmful options to counteract what the others were doing. But I quickly realized that some people were bidding with what seemed like unlimited virtual credits. Whatever system was in place, some participants had far more influence than others. The worst part was watching the subject's deterioration. What had started as mild discomfort had escalated to genuine terror. These people were trapped in small rooms, subjected to psychological pressure that was clearly beyond anything they could have consented to. And we were the ones directing it, voting on new ways to torment them. I tried to close the laptop and leave, but Dr. Chen approached my workstation. She explained quietly that participants were required to complete the full session to receive payment. More importantly, the non-disclosure agreement I'd signed included specific penalties for early withdrawal or breach of confidentiality. The penalties were substantial. Several £1,000s in compensation for disrupted research. So I stayed. I watched as the scenarios became increasingly extreme, as the subjects were pushed beyond psychological breaking points. I made token bids on harmless options while others seemed to compete for the most creative forms of torment. By the end of the session, several of the subjects had suffered what appeared to be complete psychological breakdowns. They were catatonic, unresponsive, clearly traumatized by whatever they'd experienced in those rooms. The platform recorded our collective decisions and thanked us for our participation in the research study. Dr. Chen provided payment as promised, along with contact information for future research opportunities. She reminded us of our confidentiality obligations and the legal consequences of discussing the research with anyone outside the authorized team. I left Manchester that night feeling sick about what I'd witnessed and participated in. But I also had £500 in my account and the promise of more work if I was interested. The money was more than I made in a week at my regular job. Over the following days, I tried to research the Institute for Behavioral Studies more thoroughly. The website was still there, but when I looked more carefully, the academic papers seemed to be fake. The staff profiles used stock photos, and the university affiliations couldn't be verified. I also started to doubt whether what I'd witnessed was actually research at all. The whole setup felt more like entertainment than academic study. The bidding system, the competitive element, the focus on causing distress rather than understanding behavior, it all suggested something much darker than legitimate research. But I couldn't report it without implicating myself. I'd signed legal documents, participated willingly, even made decisions that contributed to whatever those people had suffered. Any investigation would reveal my involvement and potentially lead to the legal consequences Dr. Chen had warned about. 2 weeks later, I received another invitation. Same format, same professional presentation. But this time, the compensation was higher, £1,000 for participation. The email mentioned that I'd been selected for a premium research program based on my previous contributions. I should have deleted it immediately. Should have blocked the sender and tried to forget the whole thing had ever happened. But £1,000 was substantial money, and I told myself that maybe I could participate without actively contributing to harm. Maybe I could bid on harmless options, try to protect the subjects rather than torment them. The second session was worse, much worse. The subjects weren't just being psychologically pressured, they were being physically harmed, not severely, but deliberately and systematically. Small injuries, controlled pain, careful degradation designed to break them down completely. And the other participants were enthusiastic about it. They were bidding enormous amounts on scenarios that would cause maximum suffering. The virtual credit system had been replaced with what looked like real money, pounds sterling being transferred in real time to implement specific forms of torture. I realized I wasn't participating in research at all. I was part of an audience paying to watch and direct real torture, broadcast live through the dark web to paying customers around the world. The professional presentation, the academic credentials, the research terminology, it was all camouflage for something much more sinister. The subjects weren't volunteers who had consented to psychological testing. They were victims, probably kidnapped or coerced, being tortured for the entertainment of people wealthy enough to pay premium prices for customized suffering. And I was one of them. By participating, by staying silent, by accepting payment for my involvement, I'd become part of a network that treated human torture as interactive entertainment. The sessions continued monthly. Each time, the compensation increased and the scenarios became more extreme. I told myself I was trying to minimize harm by bidding on less severe options, but I knew I was just rationalizing my continued participation. The money was addictive. Thousands of pounds for a few hours of watching screens and clicking buttons. More than I made in months at my regular job. It let me move to a better flat, buy things I'd never been able to afford, live a lifestyle that would have been impossible on my normal salary. But I also knew that every session I attended meant more people were being tortured for entertainment. Real people suffering real pain, while audiences around the world paid to watch and participate in their degradation. The network was vast. What I thought was a small research study was actually one node in a global system. There were hundreds of these sessions running simultaneously, different themes and scenarios for different audiences. The technology allowed real-time interaction between viewers and victims, turning torture into a personalized entertainment service. The worst part was realizing how many people were involved. The sessions I attended had dozens of participants, each paying substantial amounts for the privilege of directing human suffering. Multiply that across hundreds of simultaneous sessions, and you're looking at thousands of people who treat torture as entertainment. These weren't criminals or social outcasts. They were people with professional jobs, disposable income, the technical knowledge to access dark web platforms. They were probably colleagues, neighbors, maybe even friends and family members. Normal people who had found a way to pay for something monstrous, while maintaining plausible deniability about their involvement. I still receive invitations to new sessions, premium events, exclusive content, opportunities to direct increasingly extreme scenarios. The compensation offers have reached amounts that would change my life permanently. Enough money to quit my job, buy a house, never worry about financial security again. And I'm tempted. Not because I enjoy watching people suffer, but because the money would solve every problem I have. Because it's easy to rationalize participation when the alternative is returning to financial stress and career uncertainty. The invitations come from different sources now, but they're clearly part of the same network. Academic institutions, research organizations, market research companies, all fronts for the same underlying system. They've probably identified thousands of potential participants, people with the right combination of financial need and moral flexibility to become part of their audience. The person sitting next to you at work might have attended one of these sessions last night. Your university lecturer, your doctor, your neighbor, any of them could be supplementing their income by paying to watch and direct real torture. And the victims could be anyone. People who responded to job advertisements, answered research invitations, trusted professional-looking organizations. People like me, who thought they were participating in legitimate work until it was too late to back out. The next time you see a research invitation with unusually high compensation, or a job opportunity that seems too good to be true, remember that some offers are designed to compromise you gradually, to make you complicit in something horrible through small steps and financial incentives. You might already be on their lists. They might already know exactly what compensation amount would be enough to make you consider participating. What professional presentation would convince you it was legitimate? And once you've attended one session, once you've accepted payment for your participation, you're part of the network whether you want to be or not, because they know that most people, faced with the choice between exposing themselves or staying silent, will choose to protect their own interests, just like I did. I still remember the exact moment I realized it wasn't a prank. There was something about the bruises on his face that looked too real, too painful. And his eyes, God, his eyes as he stared directly into that camera. I've never seen genuine fear like that before. Not from Jay. It started innocently enough. Just another weird link my friend Jay had found on some obscure forum. He was always sending us these things, supposed red rooms or whatever from the dark web. You know how it goes. Always with a bunch of laughing emojis like it was all just a big joke. And it always was, until it wasn't. Jay was the kind of person who exhausted you just by existing. Actually, that sounds harsh. Let me rephrase that. He had this constant need for attention that could be draining. He was always staging these elaborate pranks, fake ghost encounters on video calls, prank calls to forum moderators that he'd record. And once, he even created this whole fictional stalker just to get karma on Reddit. The guy lived for reactions. Any reaction. I usually just went along with it. Never fully believed his stunts, but I'd play along because, well, he was my friend. Sometimes his pranks crossed lines. Occasionally they were genuinely funny, but mostly they were just a lot too much. So when that Red Room link appeared in our group chat, I didn't even bother clicking. Just another one of Jay's attempts to get us all worked up, I thought. But something felt off that week. Jay wasn't his usual self. He wasn't bombarding the chat with his typical nonsense. He wasn't trying to one-up everyone's stories. He was just quiet. I remember thinking maybe he'd finally grown bored of his own antics. Or perhaps he'd been banned from some platform again. But I kept coming back to the last thing he sent us. Something about this link being legitimate, about using headphones, about being warned. Then he disappeared. At first, I didn't think much of it. Jay had a habit of vanishing for days at a time, usually chasing after some girl he'd met online. He'd resurface eventually with wildly exaggerated stories that none of us believed. But this time felt different. It stretched on too long. On the third day, his mother called me. I still get chills thinking about that call. Her voice had this tremor to it that I'd never heard before. She explained that Jay hadn't been home, that his phone was completely off. I tried to reassure her, told her it was probably just another one of his elaborate pranks. But there was this moment, this awful, gut-wrenching moment, when her voice broke while telling me he'd left without his camera. Jay never went anywhere without that camera, ever. It was like an extension of himself. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I promised I'd come over to check his room, maybe look through his computer for any clues. I wish I could go back to that moment. I wish I'd just stayed home. His room was exactly as he'd left it, messy, full of half-finished projects. I checked his laptop first, nothing unusual. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed his desk drawer was slightly open. I probably wouldn't have looked inside if it had been closed completely. Funny how such small decisions change everything. There it was, a flash drive hidden behind a stack of old Polaroids, labeled with red marker, if gone. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to just hand it over to his mother, or maybe to the police. But curiosity, or maybe a misplaced sense of responsibility, got the better of me. I took it home and plugged it into my computer. What happened next still haunts me. The drive auto-launched a single file. No name, no extension. Just static at first, and then there was Jay, tied to a metal chair. The lighting was dim, like there was a single bulb hanging somewhere just out of frame. He was gagged. He was crying, trying desperately to communicate something. He looked genuinely terrified. Not the fake scared he'd do for his videos, not acting. This was raw fear. I had to pause it. I physically couldn't continue watching. I remember standing up so fast my chair tipped over. I paced around my room, trying to convince myself this was just another one of his elaborate stunts. Maybe for a film project. Maybe for some weird internet challenge. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. When I finally worked up the courage to look at the drive again, something impossible had happened. There were now 3 videos. I swear on everything I believe in, I hadn't downloaded anything else. I hadn't clicked anything. They just appeared. The second video was worse, much worse. Jay was still in that same chair, but his face was now swollen and bruised. His lip was split open, and his pinky finger, I still have nightmares about this. It was just gone. The stub was wrapped in dirty-looking duct tape and gauze, but it was clearly missing. And the way he looked at the camera, it was like he was looking directly at me, silently pleading, that same light swinging somewhere above him, creating these shifting shadows across his face. You know when something is so horrific your brain refuses to process it? When you keep telling yourself it must be fake, even though every instinct is screaming that it's real. That's where I was, staring at my screen, hands shaking so badly I could barely move the mouse, telling myself it had to be special effects or some digital manipulation. But it wasn't. It was real. It was happening. Then the screen glitched. For just a second, everything went black. When the image returned, there was text on the screen. Just one word. Vote. I scrolled down without thinking, and that's when I saw them. 3 buttons below the video: remove left hand, pull tooth no water for 24 hours. I froze. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. Was this some kind of sick interactive video? A game? I didn't mean to interact with it at all, but I hovered my cursor over the no water option, just to see if it was actually clickable. The screen blinked. A message appeared. Your vote has been counted. I panicked. I ripped the flash drive out of my computer so violently I'm surprised it didn't break. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. I couldn't stop shaking. I was convinced I'd done something terrible, that I'd somehow participated in whatever nightmare Jay was trapped in, that I'd made things worse. Later that night, after hours of pacing and panicking, I checked the drive again. There was a 4th file. Same setup, same chair, same swinging light. But now Jay was blindfolded, still gagged. There were these horrible marks on his arms, like wires had been wrapped around them and pulled tight. I could barely bring myself to watch, but I forced myself to. I needed to understand what was happening. At the very end of the clip, just before it cut to black, Jay moved his lips. There was no sound, but I could read what he was trying to say. One word: run. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I kept seeing his face when I closed my eyes. The following morning, I took everything to the police. The drive, the videos, the voting page. I showed them all of it. I was desperate for them to tell me it was all an elaborate hoax, that Jay was fine, that this was just some dark corner of the internet playing tricks on me. But they couldn't say that. Instead, they told me there was no way to trace where the files had come from. The metadata had been wiped clean. The source was encrypted. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what they were doing. They took the driver's evidence and told me not to share anything about this online. Then they sent me home. That was 3 weeks ago. Jay is still missing. His room remains untouched. His camera still sits on his desk where he left it. His mother calls me every day, asking if I've heard anything new. I never know what to tell her. I've deleted our group chat, blocked everyone else who was in it. I don't even open my browser without a VPN now. I've become paranoid about everything digital, every link, every file, every innocent-looking attachment. Sometimes I dream about that swinging light bulb, that dull, rhythmic sway casting moving shadows. I can hear it even when I'm awake, that faint creaking sound. The last thing Jay told us before he disappeared was that clicking the link could get us killed. I laughed it off then. I'm not laughing anymore. Dark voyeurs. I never wanted to share this story. Even now, as I type this out at 3 a.m. with my blinds drawn tight, I keep second-guessing myself. But after what happened last week, after seeing that familiar username pop up in my email, I realized I need to put this somewhere. Maybe as a warning. Maybe just to convince myself I'm not going mad. I've always been the tech guy in my friend group. The one people call when their laptop's acting up or when they need help setting up their new smart TV. It started back when I was 13, taking apart my dad's old computers in our garage in Manchester. My parents thought it was just a phase, but computers made sense to me in a way people never did. I was that quiet kid who'd rather debug code than go to parties. Not exactly the most exciting childhood, but it led me down some interesting paths. University was when things really took off. I studied computer science at Leeds, and while everyone else was out getting plastered at the student union, I'd be in my room exploring the furthest corners of the internet. It wasn't just about the coding challenges or the hacking forums, though those were fascinating enough. I was curious about what else was out there, beyond the surface web most people never venture past. That curiosity is what led me to the dark web in my second year. Looking back, I wish I could go back and slap some sense into my younger self. I thought I was being so clever, so edgy, setting up Tor, finding those first .onion links, feeling like I was some kind of digital explorer. It's embarrassing now, how proud I was of myself, like I'd discovered some secret club. I wasn't doing anything particularly dodgy at first, just browsing, looking at some marketplaces out of curiosity, reading forums where people discuss privacy and security. I remember telling myself that I was just there for academic reasons, to understand the full landscape of the internet. That's what we tell ourselves, isn't it? That we're just observers, not participants, that we can look without being touched by what we see. I'd been exploring for about 6 months when I came across a link on one of the forums. Someone had posted it with a cryptic message, for those with stronger stomachs than mine. No other context, no explanation. I should have left it alone. I knew even then that there were corners of the dark web no one should visit, but there was something about the way it was phrased, like a challenge. And I'd always had trouble walking away from a challenge. It was a Tuesday night in November. I remember because my flatmates had gone to see some horror film at the cinema. Ironic, considering what I was about to witness was far worse than any fictional horror. They'd invited me along, but I'd claimed I had coursework to finish. In reality, I just wanted a few hours alone to explore without anyone looking over my shoulder. My room was small, with just enough space for a bed and a desk crammed under the window. The streetlight outside cast an orange glow through the cheap blinds, making patterns on my keyboard as I clicked the link and waited for the page to load. Tor is notoriously slow, and I remember drumming my fingers, wondering if the link was dead. Maybe part of me was hoping it wouldn't load at all. When it finally did, it looked underwhelming at first. A black background, a simple login page with no graphics or explanations. Just a username and password field, and below it, a button that said Observe. No option to register that I could see. I was about to close it when I noticed a small line of text at the bottom. Guests welcome for preview only. I hesitated. Every instinct was telling me to close the browser and forget I'd ever seen this page. But that damn curiosity, it's like an itch you can't help scratching, even when you know it'll make things worse. I moved my cursor to the Observe button and clicked. The screen went black for a moment, then loaded what looked like a streaming video. The quality was poor, grainy, and with a slight delay, like CCTV footage. It showed a room, empty, except for a metal table in the center. The walls were concrete, and there was a drain in the floor. My first thought was that it was some kind of industrial space, maybe an abandoned building. Then I noticed the tools arranged neatly on a tray beside the table. Scalpels, pliers, things I couldn't even identify. My stomach dropped. I knew I should close the browser immediately, but I was frozen, hoping this was just some elaborate setup for a prank or a very convincing piece of performance art. That's when I noticed the chat window on the right side of the screen. Messages scrolling by too quickly to read properly. Anonymous users I didn't recognize, typing in a mix of languages. I caught fragments in English asking when it would start, commenting on previous sessions, preparing requests for what would happen next. It reminded me of those live gaming streams my flatmate would watch, except there was something soulless and predatory about the way these messages moved, like digital vultures circling. I felt sick. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hoax, a shocking display put on to scare people or to scam them out of money. I remember adjusting my position in my chair. The cheap foam cushion had gone flat after too many all-night coding sessions. My neck was stiff. I always got tense when I was anxious, a habit since childhood that my mum used to point out. But then a door opened on screen and two figures entered the room. One was wearing a plain white mask that covered their entire face, dressed in what looked like surgical scrubs. The other, God, I still see them in my nightmares, was a young man, maybe in his 20s, with tape over his mouth and his hands bound behind his back. His eyes were wild with terror as he was forced onto the table. I should have closed the browser then. I should have reported it to someone, though I had no idea who would have jurisdiction over something like this. Instead, I sat there, telling myself it couldn't be real, even as the chat window exploded with activity. Users were placing what looked like bids, specifying what they wanted to see done. The messages contained horrific requests, starting with extremities, avoiding facial damage initially, grotesque suggestions about the victim's eyes. My throat went dry as I read them. I remember my hand hovering over the trackpad, trembling slightly. The heating in my room had kicked on, that familiar clicking sound as the radiator warmed up, such a normal, everyday sound that felt completely at odds with the horror unfolding on my screen. I felt like I was going to be sick. This couldn't be happening. Not in real life, not with me watching. I told myself it was an elaborate fake, that the person on the table was an actor, that the blood that began to flow when the masked figure made the first cut wasn't real. but deep down, I knew. The screams that came through my headphones weren't acted. The terror in that young man's eyes wasn't performed. I finally snapped out of my horrified trance and slammed my laptop shut. I ran to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. When I came back, shaking, I opened my computer again, not to watch, but to figure out how to report what I'd seen. But the page was gone, redirecting to an error message. I tried the link again, but it was dead. For days afterwards, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room, that table, those tools. I told myself there was nothing I could have done. I had no way of knowing where it was happening. No way to identify the people involved. I tried to convince myself it might have been fake after all. People can do amazing things with special effects these days, right? But I knew the truth. I'd seen something real, something horrific, and I'd done nothing but watch. I nearly dropped out of university. I stopped going to lectures, stopped talking to friends. My flatmates thought I was having some kind of breakdown, which I suppose I was. I formatted my hard drive and reinstalled everything, paranoid that somehow I'd been tracked, that whoever ran that site knew who I was and what I'd seen. After a few months, I started to recover. I told myself it was a one-time mistake, that I'd never go near the dark web again. I focused on finishing my degree, got a job at a cybersecurity firm in London, built a normal life. I almost managed to convince myself that night had been some kind of fever dream, until last week. I was working late, alone in my flat. These days, I keep normal hours, have a girlfriend, go to the pub with colleagues, all the things normal people do. But sometimes I still stay up too late, coding or gaming or just browsing Reddit. It was around 1 a.m. when the email arrived. It came to my personal account, not the one I use for work. The subject line was just a string of numbers. The sender's address was a jumble of letters and digits that didn't look like any standard email format. I should have deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. There was no message, just a link, and below it, a single line stating they'd missed me, followed by an observer number I'd never seen before. I'd never used that identifier anywhere. It wasn't something I'd created or chosen, but as soon as I saw it, I knew. It was what they'd called me on that site. It was the automatic observer ID assigned to me when I'd clicked that button. I remember the room suddenly feeling colder, like someone had left a window open in December. My ears started to ring slightly, that same feeling I'd get before a panic attack during my university finals. I should have called someone, maybe my friend David, who works in digital security, but something kept me frozen in place. They knew who I was. They'd known all along. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely move the mouse, but I managed to delete the email. I shut down my computer, unplugged it from the wall. Childish, perhaps, but it was all I could think to do. I spent the rest of the night pacing my flat, jumping at every sound, checking the locks on my door and windows over and over. The next day, another email arrived, this time on my work account. Same subject line, same sender. I deleted it without opening it, then spent the day looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being watched. I kept checking my reflection in my monitor screen, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. The office felt different somehow. Spaces I'd walked through 1,000 times suddenly seemed threatening, filled with shadows and blind corners. The walk to the bathroom felt like crossing a minefield. When I got home, there was a third email waiting. On an old university account I hardly ever check anymore. This one had a message telling me it was my last chance, mentioning they had something special planned just for me. I didn't go to work the next day. or the day after that. I called in sick, turned off my phone, disconnected my router. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was probably just some sick joke, someone who'd hacked my accounts. But then the letter arrived. An actual physical letter delivered to my flat. No return address. Inside a single sheet of paper with an address printed on it. An address less than a mile from where I live. And a time. Tonight, 11 p.m. I've spent the day trying to figure out what to do. Go to the police and tell them what exactly? That years ago I watched something terrible on the dark web, and now I'm getting creepy emails. I have no proof, no evidence of any crime. Just my word, and the terrible feeling that somehow I've been marked. The rational part of my brain says to ignore it, to stay home, lock the doors, maybe go stay with a friend for a few days, until this blows over. But there's another part. The part that couldn't resist clicking that link all those years ago, that wonders. What if there's another victim? What if by going, I could somehow stop what happened before from happening again? Or what if it's a trap? What if I'm meant to be the next person on that table? It's 10:30 p.m. now. I have 30 minutes to decide. I keep telling myself I won't go, that only a madman would walk knowingly into what could be his own murder. But I also know that if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to find me again. I've written this all down as a record, I suppose. If something happens to me, maybe someone will find it. Maybe they'll understand. Or maybe I'm just scaring myself over nothing. And tomorrow I'll read this back and laugh at how paranoid I've become. It's funny how the mind works. Last night I was worried about paying my council tax on time. And now here I am writing what might be my last words. The ordinary and the horrific side by side. I just remembered I was supposed to call my mum tomorrow for her birthday. I should have visited more often. There's a knock at my door. It's too early. It's only 10:33. No one should be here. I'm not expecting anyone. The knocking is getting louder, more insistent. I can hear voices outside, whispering. The letterbox just flapped open. Something's been pushed through, a white envelope, just like the one that came this morning. I don't want to open it. I don't want to know what's inside. But I also know I don't have a choice anymore. They found me. And judging by what I can see through my peephole, 3 figures in white masks waiting patiently. They're not planning to leave until they get what they came for. I'm going to stop writing now. I need to think about what to do next. If anyone reads this, well, I'm not sure what I expect you to do. Just know that there are corners of the internet where real nightmares live. And sometimes, when you look into the darkness looks back and remembers your face. I used to think some people just changed, that it was a normal part of growing up. People drift, get bitter, harden. That was how I explained what happened to her for a long time. I told myself she just became someone else, that it wasn't personal. It took me years to admit it wasn't normal at all. Her name was Ava. We were best friends growing up, same street, same school, same everything. There wasn't a single sleepover or birthday party where she wasn't there. For years, we were like our own little orbit. She was smart and weird in a good way. The kind of kid who made up stories during lunch and drew creepy comics in the margins of her notebooks. I liked that about her. She made boring things feel alive. Then she disappeared. It was the summer after graduation. No big send-off, no party. One day she was there, the next she wasn't. Her aunt posted some photo on Facebook of Ava in Italy or Greece. Some old town with narrow stone streets. I hadn't even known she was leaving. I messaged her more than once. No replies. Eventually, I stopped. Not because I was mad, but because I didn't want to feel like I was bothering her. I figured maybe she needed space or just wanted a fresh start. She came back 2 years later. It wasn't announced. There was no big reunion. I just ran into her at a petrol station of all places. I remember how weirdly bright it was inside, the way bad fluorescent lighting always is. I saw her before she saw me. And even though her face hadn't changed much, I felt something tighten in my chest. Her eyes weren't the same. It wasn't anything like you see in some movies, where they can literally see darkness or whatever. But the way she looked at me, it was like I was an inconvenience, like she'd already moved on and was annoyed I hadn't. She didn't hug me, didn't smile, just gave me a flat hey and grabbed her receipt. I stood there like an idiot holding a Fanta. I didn't even say much, just something like, "You're back." And she nodded and walked out. That was it. I tried to reach out again, occasionally texting her. I got nothing back. I ran into her once more at a grocery store. Same deal, cold, flat, not mean, just completely uninterested. After a while, I gave up, and I told myself maybe that was fine. Maybe people don't always owe you an explanation for who they become. But part of me kept replaying that first moment in the gas station, the way she looked through me. That brings me to last year. It was a Saturday night, early fall. I was home alone, half watching a YouTube documentary with the volume low. My phone was face down. I remember the exact buzz it made, that long one, the kind you get with messages from people not in your contacts. I don't know why I even checked it. It was from Ava, or at least from her number. There wasn't a message, just a link, no context, no greeting. Just a string of random characters and a .onion address buried in the middle. I stared at it for probably a full minute. I didn't even breathe. My first thought was that it was a scam or malware. But some part of me, the old part that still remembered how close we were, told me she sent it on purpose, that there was a reason. I used an old laptop, booted it into Tails. I'd played with Tor before years ago, but never for anything like this. My hands were clammy the whole time. I told myself if anything looked shady, I'd kill the power immediately. The page took almost a full minute to load. When it finally did, it was just a black screen with a timer. 0248, just under 3 minutes. It counted down in red, and underneath it was a chat box already going. Lines of text, constant, some of it in languages I couldn't read. The rest was English, but coded, like slang or shorthand. I couldn't tell what they were talking about at first. When the timer hit 0, the stream flickered on. There was a chair in the middle of a concrete room. It was bolted to the floor, but empty. The room was completely empty, as far as I could see, with no windows. Just the hum of overhead lights and the faint echo of someone walking, somewhere off camera. I still didn't understand what I was looking at. Then the chat changed. People were typing numbers, making bids. Usernames I didn't recognize were posting names. Some were fake, some felt too real. One of them was next pick, pulled from chat. That's when I felt my stomach turn. I scrolled up to try and make sense of it. And that's when I saw her, Avenue. Or what had to be her. Not her real name, but an old handle she used in middle school. I hadn't seen it in years. No one else could have remembered that. She was active, posting, typing like she belonged there. Then I saw it. Bid. £9,400, then my name. M, full name, spelled correctly, properly capitalized, just sitting there like any other text. I froze. For a few seconds, I couldn't even move, couldn't even close the tab. I just sat there watching more usernames chime in. Seconded, confirmed, show us the face. I slammed the laptop shut, unplugged it. Yanked the battery like that would somehow protect me. My ears were ringing. It was like that high-pitched tone you get when your body goes into survival mode. I don't remember standing up. I just remember pacing, hands shaking, heart doing this sick little flutter in my chest. I didn't sleep that night. Next morning, I had 3 missed calls from numbers I didn't know. 1 voicemail. It was 10 seconds of silence, then the sound of something scraping across concrete. That same sound from the stream. I threw the phone out, got a new number. Emails came next, one-liners. Things like, "We'll find you," or "Don't bother running." They were always from different addresses, always with some little detail to let me know it was personal. I deleted everything and removed all of my private info off social media. I did my best to erase any trace of myself online. But the more I scrubbed, the more I realized how much of me was still floating out there. Then came the people. At first, I convinced myself it was just paranoia. I would walk to the store and feel the weight of someone behind me. I would glance out the window and see a car idling across the street, longer than made sense for someone doing nothing. But the patterns kept repeating. It was the same car, the same face. Not every day, but often enough to notice. Different angles, different times, always nearby, always lingering just long enough to register, but never long enough to confront. Eventually, I filed a police report. It was a waste of time. There were no direct threats, no evidence. They told me to block the emails and vary my daily routines. I had already done that. So I left. I moved to a different city. I changed my name. I found a place to rent off the books and stayed disconnected. I deleted every trace of myself online, and I stopped using any account tied to my real identity. For a while, I believed I was safe. That changed last week. Someone slid an envelope under my apartment door. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me walking home taken from behind. The framing was deliberate. The image was clear. It was taken recently, close and carefully. There was no note, no sender, no explanation, only the photograph. Now I am packing again. Because wherever Ava is, whatever she has become, she saw me. And this time, she chose me. It's strange what a simple dare can lead to. They say curiosity killed the cat, but no one tells you about the part where the cat spends months afterward looking over its shoulder, jumping at shadows, and sleeping with one eye open. I've debated sharing this for almost a year now. My therapist thinks it would help to externalize the experience, but I can't bring myself to tell her the whole story. Some things you just can't explain to someone whose darkest online experience is probably accidentally clicking on a pop-up ad. So I'm writing it here instead, anonymously, maybe as a warning, maybe just to convince myself it really happened. Everything started last autumn, during that weird limbo week between Christmas and New Year, when time seems to lose all meaning. I was staying at my flat in Leeds, rather than going home to my parents in Newcastle, partly because train tickets were ridiculously expensive, and partly because I needed some time alone after a rather messy breakup in early December. My flatmate had gone to his girlfriend's for the holidays, so I had the place to myself, just me, a stack of leftover Christmas chocolates, and an endless stream of mediocre content on Netflix. I was slouched on our sagging sofa one evening, laptop balanced precariously on my stomach, mindlessly scrolling through social media while some forgettable crime documentary played in the background. The radiator was making that annoying ticking sound it always did when it was heating up, and I could hear the neighbors upstairs apparently rearranging their furniture for the 5th time that week. My phone buzzed with a message from my friend Alex. We'd known each other since 6th form and still kept in regular contact despite ending up at different universities. Alex and I had this ongoing thing where we dare each other to try increasingly bizarre internet challenges or explore strange online rabbit holes. It had started years ago with innocent stuff like spend an hour on Wikipedia following random links and see where you end up, but had gradually evolved into more obscure corners of the internet. Nothing illegal, just weird, odd forums, bizarre YouTube channels, that sort of thing. His message that night was different though. He was daring me to explore the dark web. He'd sent me a link to a tutorial on how to set it up safely, along with some starting points. Apparently, he tried it himself the previous week. I remember hesitating, my thumb hovering over the link. I knew what the dark web was, of course. That hidden part of the internet not accessible through normal browsers, often associated with illegal activities, but also used by people in countries with heavy internet censorship or journalists protecting sources. I should mention I was studying computer science, specializing in network security. So there was a part of me that was professionally curious about how these hidden networks functioned. I told myself it would be educational, a practical application of the theory we'd covered in class. That's how I justified it anyway, though in reality, it was probably more about not wanting to back down from a dare and having absolutely nothing better to do with my evening. I followed the tutorial, downloading the special browser needed to access .onion sites, setting up a VPN for an extra layer of security, all the recommended precautions. I remember the heating had kicked in properly by then, making the flat almost uncomfortably warm. I'd peeled off my Christmas jumper, an ironic one with a dinosaur wearing a Santa hat, and was just in a t-shirt, the fabric sticking slightly to my back. There was a half-empty mug of tea on the coffee table, long gone cold. Outside, it had started to rain, droplets pattering against the window in that soothing, rhythmic way that usually made me sleepy. But I wasn't sleepy. There was a nervous energy buzzing through me as I waited for the browser to connect, a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The boring documentary had ended, replaced by something equally forgettable that served as white noise in the background. The browser finally connected, and I was in. At first glance, it was anticlimactic. Just a different browser with a search engine that looked more basic than what I was used to. Alex had sent me some beginner links, mostly forums discussing privacy and technology, nothing particularly sinister. I browsed for about an hour, finding it interesting, but not especially shocking. Most of it was stuff you could find on the regular internet if you knew where to look. I was almost disappointed, having expected something more dramatic based on the dark web's reputation. That's when I made my first mistake. Instead of sticking to the links Alex had sent, I decided to follow some of the links I found on those forums, curious to see where they led. Each new site had more links, and I kept following them, going deeper and deeper into this hidden network. It was like pulling on a loose thread and watching an entire garment unravel. I noticed the tone of the sites changing subtly. The discussions moved from privacy and technology to more questionable topics. How to acquire false identification, discussions about substances and services that were clearly illegal. I should have stopped then, should have closed the browser and gone back to my mindless Netflix scrolling. But there's a strange momentum to exploration like this. Each new discovery makes you wonder what else is hiding just one more link away. I remember shifting position on the sofa, my back starting to ache from being hunched over for so long. The rain had intensified, now hammering against the windows, and the wind had picked up, making the old frames rattle. My cold tea had developed that unappealing skin on top that always made me shudder. The flat suddenly felt too quiet despite the background noise of the TV and the storm outside. It was approaching midnight when I found it. I'd been following a particularly convoluted chain of links, each site more disturbing than the last. I'd gone from marketplace sites selling illegal items to forums discussing things I won't repeat here. The link was embedded in a post on one of those forums. No description, just a string of random characters ending in .onion. I hovered over it, finger poised on the trackpad. Some part of my brain was sending warning signals, like when you're about to touch something that might be hot. I should have listened to that instinct. Instead, I clicked. The page that loaded was unlike the others. Most dark web sites I'd seen were basic, with minimal graphics and simple layouts, function over form. This one had a sleek, almost professional design. Black background, crimson text, a layout that reminded me of auction sites like eBay, but with a far more ominous aesthetic. At the top of the page was a logo, just a simple red circle, and below it the words, "The Crimson Room bidding now open." I frowned, trying to figure out what kind of auction site this was. There were no product images, just listings with numbers and brief descriptions that made little sense to me at first glance. Each listing had a timer counting down and a current bid amount. The amounts were substantial, thousands in Bitcoin. It took me several minutes of confused browsing to understand what I was looking at, and when realization dawned, it hit me like a physical blow. These weren't products being auctioned, they were people. Each listing included basic details, age, gender, location, and a description of what would happen to them depending on which package received the highest bid. My stomach clenched, a wave of nausea washing over me. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate roleplay, a sick fantasy site where nothing actually happened. I tried to convince myself of this as I scrolled through the listings, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I noticed a section labeled Previous Events. I clicked it, though every instinct was screaming at me not to. It contained archives of past sessions, thumbnails that you could click to access recordings. My cursor hovered over one, trembling slightly. Again, that voice in my head begging me not to click. Again, my curiosity overriding it. The video that loaded was grainy but clear enough. I managed about 30 seconds before slamming my laptop shut, rushing to the bathroom, and vomiting until there was nothing left but bile. What I'd seen wasn't fake. The terror in that person's eyes, the sounds they made despite being gagged. There's a quality to genuine fear that can't be acted, can't be faked. And the clinical, almost bored manner of the masked figure carrying out the requests, it was real. All of it was real. I sat on the cold bathroom floor for what felt like hours, shaking uncontrollably. The storm outside had reached its peak, rain lashing against the window, wind howling through the gaps in the frames. Every noise made me flinch. My mind kept replaying those 30 seconds, unable to process that human beings could do such things to each other, that other human beings would pay to watch or direct it. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together enough to return to the living room. My laptop sat on the sofa where I'd left it, closed but somehow threatening, as if what I'd seen might leak out from between the keys. I needed to report this to the police, to someone who could do something about it. But what could I actually tell them? I had no specific information about where these events were taking place, who was running the site, or who the victims were. And I'd have to admit to accessing the dark web, to following link after link, until I found something so profoundly disturbing. I decided to go back, just long enough to gather some information that might be useful to authorities. This was my second mistake. I opened the laptop, steeling myself against what I might see. The browser was still connected, the site still open. I began taking screenshots, noting down any details that might help identify the location or the people involved. I was so focused on this self-appointed mission that I didn't notice it at first, the small notification that had appeared in the corner of the screen. When I finally saw it, my blood ran cold. A private message from an account named Admin. The message was simple. They had detected unusual activity from my connection, specifically the taking of screenshots. They had my IP address, despite the VPN, which had apparently failed at some point. They knew my approximate location, and they were sending someone to discuss my interest in their services. I slammed the laptop shut again, yanked out the power cord, and pulled the battery for good measure. Then I grabbed my phone and keys and ran out of the flat without even stopping for a jacket, despite the storm raging outside. I spent that night at a 24-hour cafe in the city center, jumping at every person who entered, convinced they had been sent to find me. In the harsh light of morning, huddled over my fifth cup of coffee, I tried to rationalize what had happened. It was probably just an automated message designed to scare people who stumbled across the site. They wouldn't really send someone after a random person who had accidentally found their operation. That would draw attention, create risk. It wasn't logical. This rationalization helped me function enough to return to my flat, pack a bag, and go straight to the train station. I spent the remaining holiday with my parents, making excuses about missing home. I didn't touch my laptop again until I was back at university, and when I did, I completely wiped it and reinstalled everything from scratch. I never reported what I'd seen. The fear of not being believed, of somehow being implicated, was too great. And deep down, there was a more terrifying thought. What if reporting it led them back to me? What if they had connections in law enforcement? It seemed paranoid, but after what I'd seen, my understanding of what people were capable of had fundamentally changed. For weeks afterward, I was certain I was being watched. I took different routes home from lectures, avoided being alone when possible, and slept with the chair propped against my bedroom door. I kept seeing the same car parked near our flat, a black sedan with tinted windows. Probably a coincidence, but it was enough to make me move out mid-semester, finding a new place on the other side of the city. The fear has faded somewhat with time. I no longer jump at every unexpected sound or suspect every stranger of being sent to silence me. I've almost convinced myself that the message was just an automated scare tactic. Almost. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night and the wind is rattling the windows, I remember what I saw. I remember that somewhere out there right now, those auctions are still happening. People are still bidding, still watching, still directing. And I know something else too. They have my information. Maybe they've forgotten about me, filed me away as an insignificant breach not worth pursuing. Or maybe they're just waiting for the right moment. I changed my number, my email addresses, even my name on social media. I've moved twice more since then, but in my darker moments, I wonder if it's enough. The internet never forgets, and neither do the people who lurk in its darkest corners. Last week, I received a plain envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name and current address. An address I've only had for 3 months. Inside was a blank sheet of paper with a small red circle drawn in the center. I'm leaving the country next week. Exchange program to Australia, as far away as I can get. I haven't told anyone where I'm going except my parents and the university administration. This will be my last post online anywhere, under any name. If you're reading this, don't make the same mistakes I did. Some curiosities aren't worth satisfying. Some dares aren't worth accepting. And some corners of the internet should remain unexplored. I think there's someone outside my window. I can see a shadow moving across the garden. It's probably just a neighbor, or maybe a fox, but I'm not taking any chances. Imagine discovering that someone has been watching you through your bedroom window for months, filming your most private moments, and selling the footage online to strangers. Now imagine that this isn't happening to just you, but to thousands of people across the country, probably the world, all completely unaware that their lives have become entertainment for perverts with deep pockets. The worst part? It's not some far-fetched nightmare scenario. It's happening right now. I stumbled across it by accident, if you can call 3 months of deliberate searching an accident. I was writing my dissertation on digital privacy and anonymity networks for my media studies degree at Manchester. Proper academic research, you understand. I wasn't some basement dweller looking for thrills. I had ethics approval forms and everything. The Tor browser had been running on my laptop for weeks. I'd bookmarked the usual suspects, a few cannabis marketplaces, some forums discussing encryption, the odd political dissent site. Standard fare for someone studying how people communicate when they don't want to be watched. My supervisor, Dr. Chen, had given me a reading list of academic papers about online anonymity, but I wanted primary sources, real examples. That's how I found the link. It was buried in a forum post about internet freedom, sandwiched between complaints about government surveillance and discussions of VPN protocols. Just a string of random characters ending in .onion with a single word underneath. Rooms. The site took ages to load. That's normal on Tor. Everything crawls along at the speed of dial-up. When it finally appeared, it looked like something from the early days of the internet. Black background, green text, no images. Just a list of what looked like chat room names, each with a number next to it. The numbers were small, usually single digits. I clicked on one called Yorkshire Evening. The page that loaded had a simple interface, a text box at the bottom, a larger window above showing messages. But there were no messages, just a counter at the top showing 3 viewers and a button that said Request Access. I sat there for about 10 minutes, watching the viewer count fluctuate between 2 and 5. Nothing else happened. No messages appeared, no instructions. Just that green text on black and the gentle hum of my laptop fan. It felt like standing outside a shop with blacked out windows, knowing people were inside but unable to see what they were doing. I tried a few other rooms. Same setup, view accounts, empty chat windows, that request access button. The names were mundane enough. Brighton Pier, Camden Market, Sunday Roast. They could have been tourism websites or local community groups, but something about the whole thing felt wrong. The way the viewer numbers changed constantly, as if people were flicking between rooms, watching, waiting. After After about an hour, I closed the browser and went back to my dissertation. I had enough material about dark web marketplaces and didn't need to go down whatever rabbit hole that site represented. Dr. Chen would be pleased with my chapter on cryptocurrency adoption in illegal markets. That was proper academic work. But I kept thinking about those rooms, the way they just sat there, empty but watched. Over the next few days, I found myself opening the site again, checking the viewer counts, watching the numbers change. It became a habit, like checking social media or the weather. A few minutes here and there between writing chapters and attending seminars. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening. I'd been working late in the university library, and when I got back to my flat in Fallowfield, I opened the site almost without thinking. The viewer count on Yorkshire Evening was higher than usual, nearly 20 people, and for the first time, there were messages in the chat window. They weren't conversation exactly, more like coordinates, times and dates, grid references. Someone had posted 53.4 degrees north, 2.2 degrees west, Thursday, 23:30. And others were responding with single words. Confirmed. Watching. Ready. I recognized those coordinates. They were for somewhere in Manchester city centre, near the cathedral, about 15 minutes from where I was sitting. The rational part of my brain knew I should close the browser and forget about it. These were clearly people planning something, and coordinates with specific times suggested it wasn't just chat. But the researcher in me was curious. What were they planning? Was this some kind of urban exploration group? A photography meetup? The coordinates were for a public area. What could they possibly be doing there that required such secrecy? Thursday came and went. I didn't go to the coordinates, but I couldn't stop thinking about them. I found myself checking the news for incidents in Manchester city centre, scanning local police Twitter accounts for anything unusual. Nothing appeared. Whatever had happened, if anything, hadn't made the news. The following week, new coordinates appeared. This time for Liverpool, then Birmingham. Always a major city. Always with that same pattern of confirmations and single-word responses. I started keeping a notebook, writing down the coordinates and times. Not because I planned to do anything with them, but because documenting patterns is what researchers do. The pattern was monthly, third Thursday of each month, around 11:30 at night. Always city centres, always near major landmarks or transport hubs. The coordinates were precise, not just somewhere in Birmingham, but specific to within a few meters. After 3 months of watching, I decided to visit one of the locations. Not during the appointed time, obviously. I wasn't stupid. But I wanted to see what was there, what might draw these people to those specific spots. The coordinates for that month were for a location near Liverpool Street Station in London. Easy enough to visit during the day under the pretense of legitimate research. The location was a small side street off the main road, narrow, with old Victorian buildings that had been converted into flats above shops. During the day, it was busy enough. People cutting through to avoid the crowds on the main street. Workers from nearby offices grabbing lunch. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would explain why someone would choose to meet there at 11:30 on a Thursday night. But as I walked down the street, I noticed something odd. Several of the buildings had small security cameras mounted on the walls. Not the usual CCTV you see everywhere in London, but smaller, more discreet ones. They were angled to cover the street from different positions, creating overlapping fields of view. It struck me that you'd have very comprehensive coverage of anyone walking down that street. I went back to Manchester and thought about what I'd seen. Coordinates, confirmations, a location with extensive camera coverage. It was starting to form a picture I didn't like. The next month, I made a decision that I still regret. I went to the Manchester location at the appointed time. It was raining that Thursday night, the kind of fine drizzle that soaks through your jacket without you noticing. I'd positioned myself about 50 meters from the coordinates in the doorway of a closed shop, where I could see the street but remain hidden. I told myself I was just observing, that I'd leave at the first sign of anything dodgy. At 11:20, a figure appeared at the far end of the street. They walked slowly, deliberately, checking something on their phone. At 25 past, another person arrived from the opposite direction. They didn't acknowledge each other, but both stopped near the exact coordinates I'd written down. By 11:30, there were 5 people standing in roughly the same area. None of them spoke. They just stood there, occasionally glancing around or checking their phones. I was beginning to think this was the most boring conspiracy I'd ever witnessed when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Each of them was holding a small device, something about the size of a smartphone, but with what looked like a small lens on one end. And they were all pointing these devices in the same direction, toward the residential buildings that lined the street. I followed their gaze and saw what they were looking at. In one of the upper floor windows, there was a light on. Just a normal household light. But in the window, I could see the silhouette of someone moving around. Someone who had no idea they were being watched. The group stood there for exactly 30 minutes. Then, without any signal I could detect, they all began to walk away in different directions. The whole thing had taken place in complete silence. I waited until they were all gone before I walked home. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my front door. I just witnessed something that felt deeply wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. A group of people with cameras watching someone's flat. It could have been innocent. Amateur photographers, urban explorers, even researchers like myself. But the secrecy, the coordinates, the synchronized timing, none of that suggested innocent activity. The next day, I went back to the dark website. The viewer count for Yorkshire Evening was back to normal levels, but there was new activity in the chat. People were posting what looked like file names. MCR2311, window4.mp4, MCR2311, kitchen2.ave. The files were followed by strings of numbers and letters, Bitcoin wallet addresses. I realized I was looking at a marketplace. The coordinates weren't meeting points for urban exploration or photography. They were organized surveillance sessions. People were gathering to film strangers in their homes and then selling the footage online. That was disturbing enough. But as I dug deeper into the site, I found something worse. Some of the room names weren't locations at all. They were what looked like names or descriptions. Red hair student, night shift nurse, single mum bedtime. These weren't random voyeurism sessions. They were targeted. Someone was identifying specific individuals and organizing groups to film them. The Bitcoin addresses suggested people were paying for custom content. I felt sick. This wasn't academic research anymore. I'd stumbled into something that was actively harming real people. People who had no idea they were being watched, filmed, and potentially stalked. The rational thing would have been to contact the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd found a website on the dark web where people might be doing something illegal. That I'd witnessed a group of people standing on a street corner with cameras. I had no proof of wrongdoing, no evidence that actual crimes were being committed. Instead, I tried to dig deeper. I wanted to understand the scale of what I'd found, to gather enough evidence to make a proper report. I started monitoring the site more systematically, documenting the patterns, screenshotting the conversations. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The site wasn't just organizing surveillance, it was a complete ecosystem. People would post requests, descriptions of individuals they wanted filmed. Others would volunteer to do the filming. The footage would be edited and sold. There were even reviews and ratings for the people doing the filming. But the most disturbing part was how organized it all was. This wasn't a few perverts with cameras. There were hundreds of people involved, maybe thousands. The Bitcoin transactions suggested serious money was changing hands. Someone was running this as a business, and the targets weren't random. They were often vulnerable people, students living alone, single parents, people working night shifts. The kind of people who might not notice if someone was watching their flat, or who might not be believed if they reported feeling like they were being stalked. I started having trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought about those silhouettes in windows, people going about their evening routines, while strangers with cameras watched from the street below. I began checking my own windows obsessively, making sure the curtains were closed, looking for unusual activity outside. The paranoia was probably irrational. I lived in a shared house with 3 other students. We were on the ground floor with a small front garden that would make surveillance difficult. But knowing what I knew about how these people operated, I couldn't shake the feeling that I might be next. That's when I noticed the van. It was parked on my street when I got home from university on a Friday afternoon. Nothing unusual about that. Parking was always tight in our area. But it was still there when I left for the pub that evening, and when I came back around midnight. The next morning, it had moved to a different spot, but it was still on the same street. I probably wouldn't have thought anything of it if not for what I'd learned about the surveillance network. But once you know how these things work, you start seeing patterns everywhere. The van was always positioned where it had a clear view of our house. The windows were tinted so you couldn't see inside, and it moved regularly, just enough to avoid drawing attention. I started taking photos of it, documenting when it appeared and where it parked. I even walked past it a few times, trying to see if anyone was inside. But the windows were too dark, and I didn't want to be too obvious about looking. After a week of this, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. The van probably belonged to someone who worked in the area or was visiting a friend. I was letting what I'd discovered online affect my perception of reality. That's what happens when you spend too much time staring into the dark corners of the internet. But then I found my address in the site's chat logs. It was buried in a conversation about Manchester targets, listed alongside 2 other addresses in my area. Someone had posted it with a description that matched my appearance and mentioned my university. They knew where I lived, what I looked like, and where I studied. The worst part was the response. Other users were bidding for the surveillance job, offering to provide footage within the week. The highest bid was nearly £200. I'd gone from researcher to target without realizing it. Someone had identified me, probably through my digital footprint, and put me up for sale on their surveillance marketplace. The van outside my house wasn't paranoia, it was reconnaissance. I packed a bag and left Manchester that night, told my housemates I had a family emergency and would be gone for a few weeks. I drove to my parents' house in Chester and stayed there for a month, claiming I needed to focus on my dissertation without distractions. During that time, I tried to report what I'd found to the police. I called the non-emergency number and explained about the dark website and the surveillance network. The officer I spoke to was polite, but clearly didn't understand the technical aspects of what I was describing. He took down my details and said someone would get back to me, but no one ever did. I tried contacting some of the cybercrime units, but without concrete evidence of specific crimes, they weren't interested. What I'd found was disturbing, but it existed in a legal grey area. Standing on public streets with cameras isn't illegal. Selling footage of people in their homes might be, but proving that was happening would require an investigation that no one seemed willing to undertake. Eventually, I had to go back to Manchester to finish my degree. I changed my address, moving to a different part of the city. I bought thick curtains for all my windows and developed a habit of checking the street before leaving my flat. The van never reappeared, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I finished my dissertation on a completely different topic. Dr. Chen was disappointed that I'd moved away from my original research into dark web marketplaces, but I told him I'd found the subject too depressing to continue with. He probably thought I was being oversensitive. The surveillance site is still online. I check it occasionally, using different computers and IP addresses, just to see if it's still active. It is. The room names change, the coordinates shift to different cities, but the pattern continues. People gathering to film strangers, selling the footage to whoever wants to buy it. Sometimes I think about the person I saw in that window in Manchester. The silhouette moving around their flat, completely unaware that 5 people were standing in the street below, recording their every movement. I wonder if they ever found out. I wonder if they ever felt that creeping sensation that someone was watching them, or if they just went about their life, never knowing that their privacy had been violated and sold to strangers online. The thing that disturbs me most isn't the surveillance itself, although that's bad enough. It's how organized it all is, how many people are involved, how much money is changing hands. What I found wasn't some small group of perverts with cameras. It was an industry. And if they could identify me from my digital footprint, if they could find my address and put me up for sale on their marketplace, then they can do the same to anyone. Your address might already be on one of those sites. Someone might already be bidding for footage of you going about your daily routine. You'll probably never know. That's the worst part. You'll never know if that van parked outside your house is just a van, or if someone inside is watching you through tinted windows. You'll never know if that person lingering on the street corner is just waiting for a bus, or if they're pointing a camera at your bedroom window. You'll never know, but now you'll always wonder. And that's exactly what they want. I thought I was doing something good. That's what makes this whole situation so much worse. 6 months ago, I was just someone trying to make the internet a safer place. Now, I'm hiding in a Premier Inn somewhere in the Midlands, knowing that tomorrow night, thousands of people will tune in to watch me become the star of my own nightmare. It started when I applied for a job as a content moderator with a company called SafeNet Solutions. They advertised themselves as specialists in keeping harmful content off social media platforms. The work seemed meaningful, protecting children from inappropriate material, removing violent content, flagging harassment. The kind of job where you could feel like you were making a difference. I'd been unemployed for nearly 8 months after my last position was made redundant. Living in a shared house in Birmingham with people half my age. Watching my savings dwindle while sending off countless applications. When SafeNet offered me the position working from home with decent pay, I jumped at it without asking too many questions. The training was straightforward. They gave me access to their proprietary software that would queue up flagged content for review. Videos, images, live streams, all reported by automated systems or other users as potentially violating community guidelines. My job was to watch each piece of content and make a decision. Remove it, leave it up, or escalate it to a senior moderator. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Spam, harassment, people posting copyrighted material, the occasional violent video or inappropriate image involving children, which would get immediately escalated and removed. The work was emotionally draining. You see humanity at its worst when you're cleaning up after it. But it felt necessary. I worked remotely, reviewing content for 8 hours a day from my bedroom. The company provided the computer and software, along with strict guidelines about confidentiality. We weren't allowed to discuss our work with anyone outside the company, ostensibly to protect user privacy and prevent people from gaming the moderation system. About 2 months into the job, I started noticing patterns in some of the content that came through my queue. Videos that looked like they were filmed in similar locations, industrial settings with concrete walls and minimal furnishing. The content itself wasn't explicitly violating guidelines, but something about it felt off. Empty rooms with strange equipment, brief clips of preparations for something unclear. When I flagged these for escalation, asking for guidance on whether they violated guidelines, my supervisor would respond that they'd been reviewed and deemed acceptable. I was told to stop wasting time on borderline cases and focus on clear violations. The message was clear: approve these and move on. I tried to push back, suggesting that these videos might be connected to something harmful, but I was reminded that I was new and still in my probationary period. SafeNet had strict policies about overreach. Moderators who flagged too much borderline content would be let go for inefficiency. I needed the job, so I started approving the strange videos without comment. Then I began noticing something else. Some of the videos had embedded metadata that my software could read, but that wouldn't be visible to normal users. Location data, timestamps, user identifiers. I shouldn't have been able to see this information. It suggested my moderation software had deeper access to these platforms than a normal content reviewer would need. One evening, while reviewing a particularly odd video of an empty room with metal restraints visible in the background, I noticed that the metadata showed it was being live-streamed to thousands of viewers simultaneously. This wasn't a recorded video that someone had uploaded. It was happening live. And yet, it was coming through my queue as if it was standard user-generated content awaiting moderation. That's when I realized I wasn't moderating content that had already been posted. I was pre-approving content that was about to be streamed live. My approval was what allowed these broadcasts to go public. I started paying closer attention to the content coming through my queue. Mixed in with normal reported posts were these live feeds from empty rooms, industrial settings, medical equipment, restraints, each one tagged with metadata showing thousands of waiting viewers, and each one requiring my approval before it could broadcast. I was essentially the gatekeeper for what I was beginning to suspect were preparation streams for red rooms. I tried to refuse approval for one of these feeds, marking it as violating guidelines for depicting implements that could be used for harm. Within an hour, I received a call from my supervisor. They reminded me that I was still in my probationary period and that my approval rates had been flagged as concerning. Too many rejections could result in immediate termination. But they also said something that chilled me. They mentioned that they had my address, my banking details, my emergency contacts, standard information for any employer, of course. But the way they referenced it felt like a veiled threat, like they wanted me to know how easy it would be to find me if I became a problem. I kept approving the feeds. What choice did I have? I needed the work, and I convinced myself that maybe I was wrong about what I was seeing. Maybe these were just art projects or horror film sets. Maybe the viewer counts were inflated. Maybe I was letting the stress of the job make me paranoid. 3 weeks ago, everything changed. a new type of content started coming through my queue. Not just empty rooms anymore, but rooms with people in them. People who looked unconscious or restrained. People who weren't acting. People who looked genuinely terrified when they were conscious. The metadata on these streams showed viewer counts in the tens of thousands. Chat functions that were active with comments I couldn't read, but that seemed to be taking requests or making suggestions. Payment information showing cryptocurrency transactions happening in real time. I couldn't approve them. I just couldn't. I started marking them all as violations, knowing it would flag my performance, but unable to live with myself if I didn't. For 3 days, I rejected every single one of these streams that came through my queue. On the 4th day, I received another package at my house. I hadn't ordered anything, and there was no delivery note. Inside was a tablet computer that automatically connected to a network when I turned it on. The screen showed a live feed of my own bedroom, taken from the camera on the work computer SafeNet had provided. I was looking at myself looking at the tablet. A message appeared on the tablet screen. You've been very thorough in your moderating work. Time for a performance review. Below it was a link to another stream, one showing an empty room with a metal table in the center. In the corner of the screen was a viewer counter, already showing thousands of people waiting, and a countdown timer set for 2 weeks from that day. I packed immediately and left Birmingham that night. I've been moving around England since then, staying in different hotels, buying train tickets with cash, avoiding CCTV when possible. But they keep finding me. Notes left in hotel rooms, messages sent to new phone numbers I've bought, photos of me taken in public places that get sent to whatever device I'm using. The most disturbing realization is that SafeNet Solutions isn't what I thought it was. It's not a company fighting against harmful content. It's a company facilitating it. They use legitimate content moderation as cover for something much darker. The majority of moderators probably are genuine, reviewing normal social media posts. But some of us, selected for particular reasons, were unknowingly gatekeeping for red room broadcasts. I think about how many streams I approved over those 4 months. How many people were harmed because I clicked approve on their preparatory footage. How many victims suffered because I was too concerned about keeping my job to ask harder questions about what I was really moderating. Last week, I tried going to the police in 3 different cities. The evidence I have is circumstantial. Screenshots, metadata, the tablet they sent me. But when I tried to describe the situation, it sounds like the paranoid delusions of someone who spent too much time looking at disturbing content. They take reports, but I can tell they think I'm either lying or having a mental health crisis. The countdown on the tablet now shows less than 2 days remaining. The viewer count has grown to tens of thousands. I've started receiving more specific messages about when and where I need to be. An address in Liverpool, a time, consequences for my family if I don't comply. And they've proven they know exactly where my sister lives, where my elderly parents shop, which route my niece takes to school. I've come to understand that the entire system is designed to implicate people who work for them. Every piece of content I approved created a digital trail connecting me to these broadcasts. Every rejection I made after discovering the truth could be used as evidence that I knew what was happening, but participated anyway. I'm not just a target now. I'm a liability who knows too much about their operation. The most terrifying part is realizing how vast this network must be. How many other content moderation companies might be fronts for similar operations. How many people think they're doing honest work cleaning up the internet when they're actually facilitating its darkest corners? I keep wondering if any of my colleagues at SafeNet knew what we were really doing. Were some of them complicit from the beginning? Were others like me, gradually drawn into something they didn't understand until it was too late? Or am I the only one who stumbled across this particular stream of content? The tablet just chimed with a new notification. The message is simple. Final preparations complete. Transport details being sent to your current location. I'm in a service station cafe somewhere between Leicester and Nottingham, trying to disappear into the crowd, but somehow they still know exactly where I am. I'm going to post this and then ditch the tablet somewhere. Maybe throw it in a bin, maybe leave it on the train. I don't know if it will make any difference. I don't know if anyone will believe this account, or if they'll dismiss it as the ramblings of someone who's lost touch with reality. But if you're working in content moderation, especially for smaller companies or remote positions, pay attention to what you're really approving. Ask questions about the metadata you can access. Notice patterns in the content. And if something feels wrong, trust that instinct even if it costs you the job. I thought I was making the internet safer. Instead, I was helping to make it infinitely more dangerous for the most vulnerable people. Every approval was another step toward this moment, when I become the content instead of the moderator. The countdown shows approximately 30 hours remaining. Thousands of people are waiting to watch what happens next. And somewhere in Liverpool, a room is being prepared for tomorrow night's broadcast. I should have asked more questions from the beginning. Should have trusted my instincts about those first strange videos. Should have realized that a job that seemed too good to be true probably was. But it's too late for should-haves now. The only thing left is to run and hope that somehow I can break free from a system I helped maintain, without ever understanding what it really was. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent months deciding what content was safe for public consumption. Now thousands of people are waiting to consume content featuring me. The moderator has become the moderated. You'd think working for a tech startup would keep you busy enough to avoid trouble. Turns out the opposite is true when your job involves testing apps that nobody else wants to touch. 6 weeks ago, I was just a QA tester in Bristol trying to make rent on an apprentice's salary. Now I'm writing this from a service station near Cardiff, knowing that tomorrow night I'll become the main attraction for an audience I helped build, without realizing it. I work for a small company called DevCore Solutions. We're one of those firms that test software for other companies, checking for bugs, security vulnerabilities, user experience issues. Most of our clients are legitimate businesses wanting to make sure their apps work properly before launch, but some of our contracts come from less transparent sources, companies that pay well but ask few questions about what we find. The project that changed everything started in early September. My supervisor handed me a tablet loaded with a beta version of an app called StreamVault. The brief was minimal. Test the streaming functionality, check for lag issues, verify the payment integration worked smoothly. No information about who developed it or what it was ultimately intended for. StreamVault looked like any other live streaming platform at first glance. Clean interface, simple navigation, standard features you'd expect from a video app. The difference was in the back end. This wasn't designed for casual users. It had sophisticated access controls, encrypted payment systems, and viewer analytics that were far more detailed than anything I'd seen before. My job was to test it by setting up streams and checking various functions. I'd broadcast from different locations in the office, test the chat features, verify that donations and tips were processing correctly. Standard quality assurance work. The app performed well, better than many mainstream platforms I'd used. What struck me as odd was some of the advanced features buried in the settings. options for scheduling automated content, systems for managing large-scale viewer numbers, and something called interactive participation protocols that seemed overly complex for a standard streaming app. When I asked my supervisor about these features, he told me to focus on basic functionality testing and not to worry about advanced options unless they caused obvious problems. After several weeks of testing, I was asked to evaluate the app in more realistic conditions. This meant setting up streams from my flat in the evenings, testing the mobile connection, checking how the platform handled different lighting conditions and camera angles. The company provided additional equipment, professional lighting, multiple camera angles, audio equipment that seemed unnecessarily sophisticated for testing purposes. I'd stream myself doing mundane tasks, cooking dinner, working on a laptop, watching television. The streams were supposed to be private, accessible only to other testers, but occasionally I'd notice viewer counts that seemed higher than our small testing team could account for. When I mentioned this, I was told that automated systems sometimes inflated the numbers and not to worry about it. The requests from my supervisors gradually became more specific. Could I test streaming from different rooms in my flat? Could I check how well the low-light cameras worked in the bedroom? Could I verify the audio pickup was clear enough to capture conversation from other rooms? Each request seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they were creating an unusually detailed map of my living space. About 3 weeks into home testing, I started noticing technical irregularities. The app would occasionally activate when I wasn't running tests. I'd find it open on my tablet or phone, showing a black screen but with active viewer counts in the hundreds. The microphone would sometimes show activity when I wasn't speaking, suggesting the app was recording ambient sound. When I reported these bugs, the development team claimed they were working on fixes, but needed more data to identify the root cause. They asked me to leave the app running continuously for several days to help them monitor the issues. I agreed, thinking I was helping improve the product. That's when things started getting strange. I'd return home to find small items moved in my flat. Nothing missing, nothing obviously disturbed, just things like my keys being on a different table or books rearranged on shelves. I initially attributed it to stress or absent-mindedness. Then I received an email about expanding my testing role. The company wanted me to evaluate StreamVault's real-world application scenarios. They provided a list of locations around Bristol where I should test the mobile streaming, parks, shopping centres, quiet streets at night. The pay for this expanded testing was substantial, nearly doubling my usual fee. During these location tests, I began noticing people who seemed to be watching me work. Individuals who would appear at multiple test sites, always at a distance but clearly observing what I was doing. When I mentioned feeling observed to my supervisor, he said it was probably just curious passers-by, and that public testing always attracted some attention. The app's functionality continued to evolve during this period. New features appeared in updates, enhanced privacy controls, geographic tagging, integration with cryptocurrency payment systems. The viewer capacity seemed to be increasing as well. During my public tests, I'd sometimes see viewer counts in the thousands. One evening, while testing at home, I decided to explore some of the advanced features I'd been told to ignore. I dug deeper into the analytics section and found logs of all my streaming activity. Not just the official tests, but every time the app had been active, including those instances when I hadn't initiated any streams. The log showed detailed information about each session: viewer numbers, duration of viewing, geographic distribution of the audience, and most disturbing, revenue generated. People had been paying to watch my mundane test streams, my evening routine, my phone calls with friends, my conversations with my girlfriend, all of it had been monetized without my knowledge. I confronted my supervisor the next morning, but he claimed that this was a misunderstanding. The revenue data was fake, generated by the testing system to verify payment functionality. The high viewer numbers were simulated to stress test the servers. Everything I'd seen was just part of the comprehensive testing environment they'd built. But that night, I received a phone call from a blocked number. The voice was distorted, probably through software, but the message was clear. They congratulated me on my excellent testing work and mentioned specific details about my daily routines that could only have come from someone watching the streams very carefully. They explained that StreamVault wasn't just another streaming platform. It was designed for a specific type of content and a particular audience willing to pay premium prices for authentic, unscripted material. My testing phase was concluding, but my participation in the platform was just beginning. That's when I realized I hadn't been testing an app. I'd been conditioning an audience. Thousands of people had been watching me live my normal life, becoming invested in my routines, learning my patterns, developing what the industry calls parasocial relationships. I was no longer just a tester. I was the content. I immediately tried to delete the app from all my devices, but found it wouldn't uninstall. The technical support team at DevCore said they needed to remotely remove it to prevent data corruption, but that process would take several days. In the meantime, the app continued running, continued streaming, continued attracting viewers who were now paying increasing amounts to watch someone who was becoming paranoid and afraid. The requests from my supervisors became more direct. Would I be willing to continue streaming, but now as official content rather than testing? The compensation would be substantial, enough to quit my day job and focus solely on this work. They framed it as a natural progression from testing to implementation. When I refused, strange things started happening around my flat. Mail for previous tenants began arriving addressed to names I'd never heard. Food deliveries I hadn't ordered appeared at my door. People started knocking at odd hours, claiming to be from utility companies or maintenance services, always wanting to come inside to check something. I realized the extended testing period had given them extensive intelligence about my life. They knew my schedule, my habits, my visitors, my vulnerabilities. The app had essentially turned my home into a surveillance center and my daily life into a product. 1 week ago, everything escalated. I came home to find a package containing a new tablet, one I hadn't seen before. When I turned it on, it showed a live stream of the room I was sitting in, but from an angle that suggested the camera was built into the device I was holding. In the corner was a viewer count showing tens of thousands of people watching. But this time, there was also a chat window. Messages were flowing constantly. Comments about my appearance, observations about my living space, questions about my daily routine. Some viewers were offering money for me to answer specific questions or perform certain tasks. Others were discussing what they wanted to see happen next. At the bottom of the screen was a countdown timer, not counting down from weeks or days, just hours, and a message indicating that the beta testing phase was concluded and that live interactive content would begin shortly. I packed what I could carry and left Bristol that night. I've been moving between service stations and cheap hotels since then, paying cash when possible, avoiding main roads, trying to stay ahead of whatever system they have for tracking me. But they keep finding me. Hotel staff who seem to recognize me despite my using different names. Other guests who ask too many questions about my plans. CCTV cameras that seem to follow my movements too precisely. And constant notifications on any device I use, that the Stream Vault app is trying to install itself. The countdown reached 0 yesterday. Since then, I've been receiving messages on burner phones I've just purchased, texts from numbers I've never seen before. They all contain the same basic information: an address in Cardiff, a specific time tonight, and a reminder about the extensive audience that has been cultivated for this event. They've also sent proof that they know exactly where my family lives. Photos of my sister leaving her house in London, my parents shopping at their local supermarket in Bradford, my girlfriend at her university in Edinburgh. All taken recently, all clearly intended to show me that running isn't just about my own safety anymore. I understand now that DevCore Solutions isn't a normal software testing company. They're a recruitment and conditioning operation for something much darker. They identify suitable candidates, slowly accustom audiences to watching them, build up viewership numbers, and then transition their testers into live interactive content. The beta testing was never about improving an app. It was about training viewers to become invested in watching me, creating demand for more intimate access to my life, and gradually moving toward a final event that apparently thousands of people have now paid to see. I'm writing this from a motorway service station somewhere between Bristol and Cardiff. The address they've given me is less than an hour's drive from here. The designated time is in roughly 6 hours. I've tried calling the police from 3 different locations, but explaining that a streaming app beta test has led to being recruited for what I believe are red room broadcasts sounds insane even to me. The most disturbing realization is that I've been building my own audience this entire time. Every test stream where I acted naturally, every moment of genuine reaction when I noticed strange things happening, every instance of growing paranoia and fear, it's all been content that people have been paying to watch. I'm not just about to become a victim. I'm about to become entertainment for an audience I've been cultivating for months without knowing it. People who feel they know me, who have been following my story, who have been waiting for this conclusion to what they see as an elaborate performance. The counter on the latest message shows viewership numbers I've never seen before. Tens of thousands of people waiting for tonight's conclusion to the beta testing storyline. Payment processing servers working overtime to handle the demand for premium access to whatever they have planned. I keep thinking about all the other beta testers DevCore must have recruited over the years. How many people thought they were just testing an app while actually training an audience to watch them? How many discovered too late what they had really been participating in? Cardiff is getting closer. The time is running out. I could keep driving, head to Scotland, try to disappear completely. But they've proven they can find me anywhere, and now they have leverage over people I care about. The strangest part is knowing that whatever happens tonight will be broadcast to thousands of people who have been following my story from the beginning. People who watched me test streaming equipment in my flat, who saw me gradually become aware of what was happening, who have been anticipating this moment as the natural conclusion to the narrative they've been consuming. I never signed up to be an actor in someone else's show, but I've been performing for months without knowing it. The beta testing was just the audition. Tonight is opening night. The sat-nav shows 30 minutes to the Cardiff address. The clock shows 5 hours until the scheduled time. The viewers are waiting. The cameras are prepared. The show, as they say, must go on. I still don't know if I'll show up or keep running, but I'm starting to suspect it doesn't matter. With an audience this size, this invested, this willing to pay for the conclusion to my story, they'll make sure the show happens one way or another. The first thing you should know is that my family has always been careful. Our father worked in data security for 30 years, so internet safety wasn't just casual advice in our household, it was doctrine. We used VPNs before most people knew what they were. We covered webcams with tape. We treated public Wi-Fi like contaminated water. We weren't paranoid, just realistic about digital vulnerabilities. Growing up this way, I learned to navigate online spaces with caution, even if I never fully understood the technical details behind our family protocols. That's what makes everything that happened so ironic. It wasn't me who ventured into dangerous digital territory. It was my sister Mia, the careful one, the one who majored in cybersecurity before switching to journalism. Mia, who lectured me about password hygiene and regularly sent me articles about privacy breaches. Mia, who disappeared exactly 72 hours after telling me she had found something that would change how people understand the internet. The police found nothing useful. Her apartment was undisturbed, almost suspiciously so. Bed made, dishes washed, everything in perfect order. Her phone sat on her nightstand, deliberately powered off, rather than dead. Her laptop was gone. Security footage showed her entering her building on Tuesday evening, face obscured by her usual baseball cap, worn specifically to avoid facial recognition. No footage showed her leaving. By Friday morning, when she missed our weekly coffee meetup, I knew something was wrong. By Friday afternoon, when she missed her call with our parents, we all did. The weeks following her disappearance became a blur of police interviews, searching her apartment repeatedly, putting up flyers, and creating social media campaigns. The detective assigned to her case was sympathetic, but overwhelmed with other cases. After the first month, the updates became less frequent, the leads non-existent. By March, it felt like we were the only ones still actively looking. That's when I decided to examine her work more closely. Mia had been investigating technology-related stories for the past year. Data privacy concerns, corporate surveillance, emerging tech ethics. Nothing that seemed particularly dangerous or controversial. But as I went through her published articles, I noticed a pattern in her recent work: increased focus on digital encryption, anonymous networks, and references to something called invitation-only forums. Her last published piece mentioned research into the modern digital underground, but provided few specifics. I reached out to her editor, who seemed reluctant to discuss her unfinished work. After persistent questioning, he finally admitted that Mia had been working on a series about dark web marketplaces, specifically focusing on the myths and realities of what she called pay-per-view trauma. He claimed he had discouraged the project, believing it was both journalistically dubious and potentially unsafe. Mia had insisted on continuing her research, promising to be careful and maintain anonymity online. With this information, I contacted a friend from college who worked in cybersecurity. He hesitated when I explained what I needed, but my desperation must have been obvious. He agreed to help me access Mia's online accounts, though he made it clear he was only doing this because it involved a missing person. Mia's email gave us little to work with, mostly routine correspondence, subscription newsletters, and communications with known sources. Her cloud storage contained research for published articles, but nothing about her current project. It was her browser history that provided our first real lead. Although she had apparently cleared it regularly, the synced data from her accounts showed repeated visits to forums discussing anonymous browsing techniques, cryptocurrency transactions, and secure communication methods. My cybersecurity friend showed me how to safely install a Tor browser and access some of the sites Mia had visited. Most were surprisingly mundane: privacy-focused discussion boards, whistleblower information exchanges, and academic research repositories. But one recurring address stood out, an alphanumeric string ending in .onion that Mia had visited multiple times in the weeks before her disappearance. My friend couldn't access it directly. It required login credentials we didn't have. I spent the next several weeks learning everything I could about dark web navigation, cryptocurrency, and secure communication protocols. I created anonymous accounts on the forums Mia had frequented, carefully asking questions about the mysterious .onion address. Most users ignored me. Some warned me to stop asking. One sent a private message claiming the address belonged to a site called the Viewing Room, describing it as a place where everything has a price, especially the truth. This user, who went by the handle Perennial Watcher, claimed to have information about my sister, though they never specified how they knew we were connected. They offered to help me access the viewing room, but only if I agreed to their conditions. I would need to make a cryptocurrency payment, use only their recommended security measures, and promise never to reveal their involvement. The whole exchange felt dangerous, potentially illegal, but my desperation overwhelmed my caution. I agreed. The instructions arrived the next day. Elaborate security protocols, specific times to attempt access, and a cryptocurrency wallet address for payment. The amount translated to roughly $500. I followed every step precisely, making the payment and downloading additional security software. 3 days later, I received login credentials and detailed instructions for accessing the viewing room. The site itself was minimalist, black background, simple text navigation, no graphics. The main page displayed only a welcome message and a membership tier system ranging from observer to director. My credentials gave me observer access, apparently the lowest level. This tier allowed viewing of archived sessions, but no participation in live events. A counter in the corner showed 37 current users online. The archive section contained dozens of video files organized by date. Each had a clinical title format, a number followed by a letter designation and timestamp. No descriptions, no previews. With trembling fingers, I clicked on the most recent file. The video showed a simple room with white walls. A person sat in a chair facing the camera, their face obscured by digital blurring. They held a card with a date and time from 2 weeks earlier, presumably proving the video's authenticity. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then text appeared on screen, apparently messages from viewers asking for specific actions. The blurred figure would comply with simple requests, raising a hand, displaying a newspaper, turning to show different angles of the room. The video ended after approximately 20 minutes. I watched several more videos, all following the same pattern. Different rooms, different blurred figures, but the same basic concept. Viewers making requests, subjects complying. Nothing overtly violent or disturbing, just strangely clinical and detached. I couldn't understand why this would interest Mia journalistically, nor why accessing such content would put her in danger. Then I noticed a search function. With growing unease, I entered Mia's name. No results. I tried various keywords related to her: journalist, reporter, investigation. Nothing. Finally, in desperation, I searched for the date of her disappearance. 3 results appeared. I selected the first file, dated the night Mia went missing. The video began like the others. A white room, a chair, a blurred figure holding the date card. But something about the person's posture, the way they held themselves, triggered a visceral recognition. Despite the digital obscuring, I knew I was looking at my sister. The realization hit me physically, a wave of nausea and dizziness that nearly caused me to black out. when I steadied myself and focused again on the screen, the video had progressed. Mia remained seated, responding to viewer instructions. Text messages scrolled alongside the video. Usernames I didn't recognize, making requests that grew increasingly personal. They asked about her work, her investigation, what she knew about the viewing room. Mia's responses were not audible. All videos on the site played without sound, but I could see her speaking, her body language becoming more tense as the session continued. Approximately 15 minutes into the video, a new username appeared in the chat, Director Prime. Their message was simple: interview concluded. Proceeding to assessment phase. The tenor of the chat changed immediately, messages coming rapidly with single-word responses: breach, compromise, liability, confirmed. A final message from Director Prime appeared: consensus reached, signal termination approved. The video ended abruptly. I immediately clicked on the second search result, dated 1 day later. This video showed the same room but empty. The third video, dated 1 week after her disappearance, displayed only a black screen with text: asset containment complete. Archive restricted to Tier 3 and above. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I had seen. The clinical detachment of the interface, the bureaucratic language of the chat, the implication of what signal termination might mean. It all pointed to something organized, systematic, and terrifying. This wasn't random violence or opportunistic crime. This was something that operated with rules, procedures, consensus decisions. I tried to access additional information, searching for Director Prime or any of the other usernames I had seen in the chat. Each attempt was met with an access denied message. After approximately 30 minutes of increasingly frantic searching, my screen went black, replaced by a single line of text: observer status revoked, connection terminated. I immediately contacted my cybersecurity friend, explaining what I had found. His reaction was grave concern, not just for Mia, but for my safety as well. He insisted on coming over, bringing equipment to secure my devices and network. While waiting for him to arrive, I received an email from an address consisting only of numbers. The subject line was observation notice. The body contained 3 lines of text: your access to restricted archives has been logged. Your connection to subject 47J has been confirmed. Your status has been updated to person of interest. Below this was an image, a still frame from what appeared to be a security camera, showing the exterior of my apartment building. The timestamp was from 10 minutes earlier. My friend arrived 30 minutes later, immediately disconnecting my router and checking my apartment for unknown devices. He found nothing obvious, but explained that if the people behind the viewing room were as sophisticated as they appeared, they might have capabilities beyond what we could easily detect. He suggested I leave my apartment immediately, use only cash, and avoid any devices connected to my name or accounts. I spent the next several weeks moving between budget hotels, using public computers for limited online activities, and trying to decide what to do. Going to the police seemed logical, but what evidence did I have? A website I had accessed illegally, videos that no longer existed in any form I could share, and an email that had disappeared from the temporary account I had been using. Even if they believed me, what could they investigate? Eventually, I contacted a journalist from a major newspaper who specialized in technology and privacy issues. Without revealing my identity, I shared what I had discovered about the viewing room, emphasizing my sister's disappearance and the apparent organization behind the site. The journalist was cautious but interested, asking detailed questions, and requesting any documentation I could provide. 3 days after this contact, the journalist's social media accounts went silent. A week later, a brief notice appeared in the newspaper's staff section, stating they had taken a leave of absence for personal reasons. My attempts to re-establish contact went unanswered. That was 2 months ago. I've since returned to my normal life, or the appearance of it. I go to work, maintain my routine, use my regular devices, but I've installed every security measure recommended by my increasingly paranoid cybersecurity friend. I use different phones regularly. I sweep my apartment for surveillance devices daily. I watch for patterns, for people who appear too frequently in my periphery. Sometimes I convince myself it was all an elaborate hoax, a twisted prank or scam, targeting people searching for missing loved ones. Sometimes I believe Mia stumbled onto something real, something organized and dangerous that operates in plain sight through our digital infrastructure. Most days I fluctuate between these possibilities, unable to settle on which is more terrifying. Last week, I received a package containing Mia's laptop. No return address, no note. The device powered on normally but had been wiped clean. Factory settings restored, no personal data remaining. The only new file was a text document containing a single line. Investigation closed. Signal terminated. Observers reassigned. Yesterday, I noticed a new Wi-Fi network appearing intermittently near my apartment. The name changes but always follows the same pattern. A number, followed by a letter designation, followed by observer. It appears strongest late at night, when the building is quiet. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I watch my device list and see unknown connections attempting to join my network. Each attempt lasts exactly 47 seconds before disappearing. I don't know if Mia is alive. I don't know who operates the viewing room or what their purpose truly is. I don't know if they're private citizens, criminal organizations, or something with governmental connections. What I do know is that somewhere right now, someone is watching through a screen as another person holds up today's date on a card. Somewhere decisions are being made about who constitutes a liability. Somewhere a consensus is being reached. And increasingly, I feel like I'm sitting in a white room, my face obscured to viewers I cannot see, waiting for the moment when my signal too is terminated. You know that scraping sound? Metal against metal, it gets me every time. It doesn't matter if it's just someone dragging a bin across the pavement or a car door shutting too hard. My body reacts before my brain can catch up, heart racing, sweating instantly, muscles tensing up like I'm about to fight or run. It's been 16 months since I got out of that shipping container, but honestly, I don't think I'll ever really get out. Not completely. Part of me is still in there watching that screen, waiting for the next sick instruction to appear. I've tried therapy, meditation, even moved to a completely different city, but some things just stick with you, you know. I was working as a delivery driver back then, mostly doing long-haul routes across the Midlands. Not the most exciting job, but it paid decent money and kept me moving, which I've always preferred to being stuck in one place. The company I worked for wasn't exactly top tier, the kind that would take on jobs other companies rejected due to tight deadlines or unusual delivery locations. I didn't ask questions, just drove where the dispatcher told me and collected my pay at the end of the week. That particular day started normally enough. I'd been assigned a pickup at this industrial estate outside Birmingham. One of those sprawling concrete landscapes filled with identical warehouses and not enough signs. The GPS coordinates I'd been given led me to a section that seemed less maintained than the rest, with fewer operational businesses and more abandoned units boarded up with metal sheets. I remember thinking it was odd, but figured it was probably just some startup using cheap space or a business in the process of relocating. When I arrived at the exact location, there was nothing but a solitary shipping container sitting in what had once been a loading bay for a warehouse. No office, no staff, not even proper lighting. Just this standard metal container, painted that typical rust-resistant blue you see everywhere. I double-checked the address, called dispatch to confirm, and was told to proceed with the pickup as planned. The manifest listed the contents as electronic testing equipment, bound for a research facility up north. Weight was given as approximately 200 kilos, nothing unusual for the type of deliveries I typically handled. I backed my truck up to the container as best I could in the awkward space. No one appeared to help with loading, which wasn't entirely unusual for these outlying pickups. Sometimes clients would leave items ready to go with paperwork attached, especially for after-hours collections. What was strange was the lack of any paperwork on or near the container. No shipping labels, no manifest, not even a padlock securing it, just a simple latch that anyone could open. As I approached to check if there might be documents inside, I noticed a small digital keypad mounted next to the container doors that I hadn't spotted from the truck. It looked newer than the container itself, with a glowing blue display asking for a 6-digit code. I hadn't been given any code by dispatch, so I called in again. The dispatcher seemed confused, put me on hold for several minutes, then returned to tell me the client had just sent over the access code 789021 and apologized for the oversight. I punched in the numbers and the keypad emitted a soft beep before the display changed to access granted. There was a mechanical click and the container door released slightly, swinging open just enough for me to see it was dark inside. I used my phone torch to peer in, expecting to find crates of equipment that I'd need to load onto my truck. Instead, my light revealed a space that had been converted into something else entirely. Not a storage unit, but what looked like a makeshift room. The interior walls had been covered with some sort of sound-dampening material, dark and textured. A simple cot was bolted to one wall. A small chemical toilet sat in one corner. Most bizarrely, mounted on the far wall was a large flat-screen monitor, currently dark but clearly operational based on the small power light glowing at its base. I hesitated at the threshold, that first real twinge of unease creeping up my spine. This clearly wasn't any electronic equipment for delivery. Part of me knew I should close the door, call dispatch again, or even the police, and leave immediately. But curiosity pushed me forward. That fatal human flaw that leads us into situations we should avoid. I wanted to understand what I was looking at, to make sense of the discrepancy between what I'd been told and what I was seeing. I stepped fully inside, sweeping my torch around to better examine the strange setup. That's when I heard the door behind me swing shut with a metallic groan, followed by the definitive click of a lock engaging. I spun around, dropping my phone in my panic, plunging the space into near total darkness, save for the dim light coming from my phone on the floor. I lunged for the door, pulling at the handle that no longer yielded to pressure. I pounded on the metal, shouting for help, though I knew the industrial estate was largely deserted, especially at that hour. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small camera mounted in the upper corner of the container, its red recording light now active and tracking my movements. Almost simultaneously, the monitor on the wall flickered to life, illuminating the container with a harsh blue glow. The screen displayed what appeared to be a loading symbol, rotating slowly against a black background. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, text appeared on the screen. "Welcome, participant number 24. Please remain calm. Your cooperation ensures your survival." My first thought was that this had to be some elaborate prank. Maybe one of those extreme reality shows where they put people in stressful situations for entertainment. I even said as much aloud, telling whoever was watching that I wasn't interested in participating and wanted to be released immediately. The screen remained unchanged, the message glowing mockingly in the darkness. Then I heard another sound that sent ice through my veins, movement outside the container. Someone else was there. Before I could process what this might mean, a different mechanical sound came from the opposite end of the container. Not the doors I'd entered through, but what I'd assumed was just the solid back wall. A section of it was sliding open, revealing another compartment of the container that had been hidden from view. In the dim blue light from the screen, I could make out a figure huddled in that newly revealed space. A man, maybe mid-30s, looking as terrified and confused as I felt. He was trembling visibly, his clothes dirty and torn, with what appeared to be dried blood on his sleeve. Most disturbingly, his wrist bore raw marks suggesting he'd been restrained recently. The screen changed again, now displaying two columns with our apparent designations: participant number 24 and participant number 23. Below this appeared new text. "The game is simple. One must harm the other according to viewer instructions. Refusal results in punishment for both. Completion results in freedom for one." As if to emphasize the seriousness of these instructions, small panels in the ceiling slid open, and what looked like gas nozzles descended slightly. The message was clear: cooperate or suffer consequences. I tried to communicate with the other man to suggest we find a way out together, but he seemed beyond rational thought, curled into himself and rocking slightly. I couldn't blame him. Based on his appearance, he'd been in this nightmare longer than I had. The screen updated again, now showing a split view. One side displayed the interior of our container from the camera's perspective, while the other showed what appeared to be a chat window filling with messages. With dawning horror, I realized we were being broadcast somewhere online, likely the dark web, based on the anonymous usernames and the disturbing nature of the comments scrolling past. These weren't just viewers, but paying customers placing requests for what they wanted to see happen between us. A timer appeared in the corner of the screen, 10 minutes, counting down. Below it, highlighted in red: first challenge, participant number 24 must draw blood from participant number 23. Viewers choose method. The wall beside the monitor slid open to reveal a recessed panel containing various implements: a hammer, pliers, a box cutter, scissors. Tools that in any other context would be mundane, but in this setting became instruments of torture. I refused, of course, stood my ground, and shouted at the camera that I wouldn't participate in this sick game. The other man watched me with a mixture of hope and resignation that suggested he'd seen this scenario play out before. When the timer reached 8 a.m., a warning appeared. Compliance expected. Final warning. I maintained my refusal, believing, perhaps naively, that whoever was behind this would eventually realize I couldn't be coerced. At 7:30, a fine mist began spraying from the ceiling nozzles. The effect was almost instantaneous. A burning sensation on exposed skin, quickly intensifying to something beyond pain, beyond description. It felt like being flayed alive, nerve endings simultaneously on fire and exposed to ice. Both of us were screaming, clawing at our skin for relief that wouldn't come. After 15 seconds that felt like years, the spray stopped. The timer had paused at 7:15. New text appeared. Demonstration complete. Proceed with challenge or full deployment will follow. In that moment, something fundamental broke inside me. The absolute isolation of our situation became crystal clear. We were truly alone, at the mercy of unseen viewers who were deriving entertainment from our suffering. No help was coming, no rescue. Just the cold calculation of whether compliance would cause less suffering than resistance. I wish I could tell you I maintained my moral stance, that I continued to refuse despite the consequences. That would make for a more heroic story. But pain has a way of rewiring your principles, of reducing complex ethical frameworks to the simple binary of relief versus suffering. I moved toward the panel of tools, my movements mechanical and disconnected from my consciousness, as if watching someone else control my body. I selected the scissors, somehow seeming the least brutal option among monstrous choices. The other man didn't resist or try to fight me. He simply extended his arm, his eyes vacant, already knowing the routine of this horrific theater. I made the smallest cut I could on his forearm, just enough to draw the blood required by the challenge. A chime sounded from the screen, the timer stopped, and new text appeared. Challenge completed. Viewer satisfaction, 37%. Higher satisfaction increases freedom probability. That was just the beginning. What followed was a descent into nightmare that lasted for what I later learned was 3 days, but felt like weeks. The challenges escalated in their cruelty and specificity, each one presented with the same clinical detachment. Each refusal met with that unbearable chemical spray or other punishments. Extreme temperatures, deafening noise, electric shocks delivered through the metal floor. The viewers grew more numerous as our show apparently gained popularity in whatever dark corner of the internet it was being broadcast. Their requests became more specific, more depraved. And with each challenge, the viewer satisfaction rating became the metric by which our value was measured. The most horrific aspect wasn't the physical pain, though that was substantial. It was the way the system gradually turned us against each other, transforming us from potential allies into instruments of each other's suffering. With each hour, I could feel my humanity being systematically stripped away, replaced by a desperate animal focused only on avoiding the next punishment, on ensuring that if someone had to suffer more, it would be him instead of me. On what I believe was the third day, something changed. The challenges had been escalating toward what was clearly intended to be a fatal conclusion, the ultimate entertainment for the viewers. The screen displayed our final challenge with brutal simplicity. Conclusion. Phase. Only one participant exits. Viewers will determine method. As the voting commenced, visible on the screen as percentages next to various lethal options, I noticed something unprecedented, a fluctuation in the power. The lights on the camera briefly dimmed and the screen flickered. Something was happening outside our controlled environment. Moments later, there was a commotion outside the container, muffled shouting, the sound of multiple vehicles arriving. The screen went black, plunging us into darkness. Then came the sound of metal tools against the container doors, the screech of the locking mechanism being forced open from the outside. I later learned that our location had been traced through a combination of police work and grey hat hackers who had infiltrated the streaming platform. An international task force had been tracking this operation for months. A sophisticated network that abducted people from various locations placing them in identical shipping containers around the country for these brutal broadcasts. The aftermath has been its own kind of nightmare. Physical recovery, psychological evaluations, police interviews, where I had to recount every degrading detail, every moment when I chose my survival over someone else's suffering. The other man, I learned his name was Adrian, that he had been a warehouse worker who disappeared 3 weeks before I was taken. Didn't survive the medical evacuation. His body had simply endured too much trauma over his longer captivity. The police identified 13 other containers across the UK, each set up identically, each containing similar scenarios in various stages. Most of the victims were already dead. Those who survived bear the same hollow look I now see in my own reflection. People who have glimpsed humanity's darkest potential and can never unsee it. The operators of the site were never fully identified. The broadcasting equipment was sophisticated, but designed to leave minimal digital footprints. The money trail led through so many cryptocurrencies and shell accounts that it eventually went cold. The most the authorities could tell me was that the viewership had been global and substantial, with thousands paying premium rates to watch and influence our torment. I now live in a different city, under a different name. I work from home, avoiding public transportation and open spaces. I've sealed every vent in my flat, installed multiple locks on all doors and windows. I sleep with the lights on when I sleep at all. Because the most terrifying aspect of what happened isn't the physical pain I endured or the nightmares that continue to plague me. It's the knowledge that there are people, ordinary people with jobs and families and seemingly normal lives, who would pay to watch strangers torture each other. People who would take pleasure in voting for which fingers should be broken first or how deep a cut should be. People who walk among us every day, carrying this capacity for calculated cruelty behind unremarkable faces. Sometimes I find myself studying strangers on the rare occasions I venture outside, wondering if they were among the viewers, if they voted on methods to hurt me, if they were disappointed when the broadcast was interrupted before its intended conclusion. And in my darkest moments, I wonder about the viewing statistics that were displayed on that screen, how the satisfaction rating increased when I became more brutal, more creative in following their instructions. I wonder about the moment when I stopped hesitating before causing pain, when part of me began anticipating the next challenge with something other than dread. Because the true horror of that shipping container wasn't just being locked inside with someone tasked to mutilate me. It was discovering how quickly I became that someone for him in return, and how much of that person still lives inside me, waiting for the next instruction to appear on a screen. Recently, I learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is satisfy your curiosity. That clicking the wrong link at the wrong time can change everything about how you see the world, and more importantly, how the world sees you. I'm a librarian at the University of Manchester, spending my days cataloguing books and helping students find obscure references for their dissertations. My relationship with computers extends about as far as checking emails and the occasional Netflix binge. But after my divorce last year, I found myself with far too much time on my hands and a flat in Chorlton that felt uncomfortably quiet most evenings. It started innocently enough. A colleague mentioned something called the dark web during our lunch break, describing it as this hidden internet where you could find anything. She was talking about buying prescription medications without a prescription. Nothing sinister, just trying to get around the ridiculous waiting times at her GP. The way she described it made it sound like some sort of digital black market, accessible but mysterious. I suppose I was bored more than anything else. After spending another evening watching repeats of Location, 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 and finishing a bottle of Malbec on my own, I decided to have a look. How difficult could it be? The Tor browser was surprisingly easy to download. Within about 20 minutes, I was browsing what looked like a much seedier version of the regular internet. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Drug marketplaces, fake IDs, stolen credit card details. The sort of thing that made me feel like I was doing something mildly rebellious without actually breaking any laws, just by looking. I spent a few evenings casually browsing, more fascinated by the structure of it all than interested in buying anything illegal. There were forums discussing everything from cryptocurrency to conspiracy theories. It felt like being an anthropologist studying some underground culture, safely removed from any real danger. Then I found the entertainment section. Most of it was what you'd expect: pirated films, illegal streaming sites, that sort of thing. But there were other categories too: live streams, private shows, interactive content. The prices were listed in Bitcoin, which meant nothing to me, but the descriptions were becoming increasingly disturbing. I should have stopped there. I know that now. But there's something about forbidden knowledge that makes it irresistible, isn't there? Like being told not to look down when you're standing at the edge of a cliff. The red room listings were buried several clicks deep in a section that required additional verification to access. The name itself should have been warning enough, but I'd convinced myself I was just exploring, just satisfying intellectual curiosity. The descriptions were vague, but clearly implied live-streamed violence. Real people, real harm, real-time interaction from viewers who could influence what happened. I told myself I'd never actually watch one. I was just researching, trying to understand how such things could exist. But the more I read about them, the more fascinated I became. Not by the violence itself, but by the infrastructure. How did they operate? Who were the people involved? How did payment systems work? How did they avoid law enforcement? The forum discussions were the most disturbing part. Users would discuss previous shows, like they were reviewing films on IMDb. They had favorite performers, they made requests, they shared technical tips for better streaming quality. They spoke about human suffering with the casual enthusiasm of hobbyists discussing model railways. I started checking the forums more regularly, not daily, but every few days. I told myself I was conducting research, maybe even gathering information that could be useful to authorities. Really, I think I was just drawn to the darkness of it all, the same way people slow down to stare at car accidents. After about a month of this casual browsing, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the regular forum users had a location tag that said Manchester, UK time zones in their posts, references to local news events. This wasn't some anonymous figure operating from Eastern Europe or Southeast Asia. This was someone nearby, someone who might shop at the same Tesco as me, someone who might have been sitting next to me on the bus. I started paying more attention to their posts. They were a frequent contributor, offering technical advice about streaming setups, discussing upcoming shows, sharing what they called reviews of past events. Their username was Viewer1, and they seemed to have some sort of insider knowledge about how these operations worked. Then they posted something that made me shut my laptop immediately. They mentioned a location, not specifically, but descriptively, an abandoned industrial building near the canal, somewhere in the direction of Trafford Park. They were discussing technical challenges with soundproofing and internet connectivity, complaining about the difficulties of operating in such locations while maintaining security and anonymity. I recognized the area they were describing. I'd walked past it several times during my weekend runs along the canal towpath. A derelict textile factory that had been empty for years, surrounded by overgrown wasteland and partially collapsed outbuildings. The sort of place you'd expect to find used needles and broken glass, not sophisticated streaming equipment. For several days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I tried to focus on work, my mind would drift back to that forum post. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as fantasy, someone making up stories for internet points. But the technical details were too specific, too practical. This read like someone with genuine experience, not someone spinning elaborate fiction. I decided to walk past the building on my next weekend run. Just to look, just to satisfy my curiosity. If it looked completely abandoned and undisturbed, I could put the whole thing out of my mind. If there were signs of recent activity, well, I hadn't decided what I'd do then. The factory was about 3 miles from my flat, nestled between the canal and a section of wasteland that the council had been promising to develop for years. I'd run past it dozens of times before without paying much attention. It was just part of the landscape, another piece of Manchester's industrial heritage slowly rotting away. But this time, I looked more carefully. The main building was 5 stories of red brick and broken windows, exactly the sort of structure that would normally be completely inaccessible to anyone without climbing equipment. But around the back, partially hidden by overgrown shrubs, was a section where the ground floor windows had been carefully boarded up, rather than just smashed. The boards were weathered, but looked more recent than the general decay of the building. More concerning were the subtle signs of recent human activity. A section of grass that had been flattened by foot traffic, cigarette butts that weren't yet soggy from multiple rainfalls, a section of chain link fence that had been cut and carefully repositioned to look intact from a distance. I stood there for probably 20 minutes, pretending to stretch after my run, while actually studying the building. No obvious security cameras, but that didn't mean much. No sounds from inside, but the walls were thick brick that would muffle most noise. No vehicles parked nearby, but there were several access routes that would allow discreet arrival and departure. I should have called the police. I should have reported my suspicions and let trained investigators handle whatever was happening. Instead, I went home and checked the forums again. Viewer 1 had posted an update. They were planning another show for the following weekend, Saturday night, sometime after midnight. They mentioned improved audio quality, better camera angles, and special interactive features for premium subscribers. The casual tone of the post, discussing human suffering like a product launch, made me feel physically sick. I spent the entire week in a state of anxious distraction. My colleagues at the library noticed I was distant and distracted. I caught myself staring out the window during meetings, my mind replaying forum posts and imagining what might be happening in that abandoned building. Friday night, I barely slept. I kept checking the forums, watching for updates, looking for any indication that I'd misunderstood something. But Viewer 1 continued posting technical updates and responding to questions from other users. Everything suggested that something was definitely planned for the following evening. Saturday evening, I tried to distract myself with normal activities. I cooked dinner, watched television, started reading a book, but by 11 o'clock, I couldn't concentrate on anything except what might be happening just a few miles away. I put on dark clothing and walked to the canal. I told myself I was just going to observe from a distance, maybe document anything suspicious and report it to authorities on Monday morning. I wasn't planning to intervene directly or put myself in danger. The towpath was completely deserted. which wasn't unusual for a Saturday night in October. The streetlights were spaced far apart, creating long stretches of shadow between pools of orange light. By the time I reached the factory, it was nearly midnight. The building looked exactly the same as it had during my daytime visit, but now there were subtle signs of activity. A faint glow from one of the upper floor windows, barely visible behind what looked like blackout material. The sound of a generator running somewhere inside, so quiet it was almost masked by ambient city noise. I found a position behind some overgrown shrubs where I could watch the building without being easily spotted. The generator sound continued, joined occasionally by other mechanical noises I couldn't identify. Once, I thought I heard voices, but I might have been imagining it. Around 1 o'clock, a van arrived. It parked behind the building, in an area not visible from the main road. 2 figures got out and entered through what must have been a rear entrance. They moved with the purposeful efficiency of people following a familiar routine. 30 minutes later, another vehicle arrived, then another. By 2 o'clock, there were 4 vehicles parked behind the building, all positioned to avoid casual observation. I should have left then. I should have gathered whatever evidence I could and reported it to authorities. Instead, I found myself moving closer to the building, trying to find a position where I might be able to see or hear more clearly. The rear of the building had several ground floor windows that were boarded up, but not completely sealed. Through gaps in the boards, I caught glimpses of artificial light and shadows moving inside. The generator noise was louder here, joined by the hum of electronic equipment and occasional voices. I was crouched behind an old shipping container, probably 30 yards from the building, when I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. I turned around slowly, my heart hammering, expecting to see security guards or police officers. Instead, I saw a figure in dark clothing, walking directly towards my hiding position with obvious intent. They weren't trying to be stealthy. They knew exactly where I was. The figure stopped about 10 feet away and spoke in a quiet, conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than any aggressive challenge would have been. They told me I'd been expected. They said Viewer 1 had noticed unusual traffic patterns in the forums, someone asking the right questions and showing interest in specific locations. They'd been monitoring forum users more carefully lately, tracking digital footprints and cross-referencing with local activity. They explained that I'd been identified and followed during my previous visit to the building. My regular forum browsing had created a profile that made me interesting to them, someone with genuine curiosity, but no obvious law enforcement connections. They offered me a choice. I could walk away immediately, delete my forum accounts, and never return to this area or these websites. Or I could satisfy my curiosity completely, see exactly what I'd been researching, and become part of their community. They made it sound like a reasonable business proposition. They weren't threatening me with violence, just explaining my options with the calm professionalism of someone making a sales pitch. But the implication was clear. Walking away would require their trust that I'd remain silent about what I'd discovered. Staying would require my participation in activities I'd only observed from a distance. I stood there in the darkness, 30 yards from a building where I suspected horrible things were happening, being offered a choice between complicity and silence. Neither option felt like escape. I told them I needed to think about it. They said I had until the next Saturday to decide. They gave me a secure messaging app and an encrypted contact. They said Viewer 1 was particularly interested in meeting me, someone who'd shown such dedicated research interest in their work. I walked home in a state of shock that I'm still not sure I've recovered from. The casual professionalism of the encounter was almost more disturbing than any direct threat would have been. They spoke about human suffering like a business operation, about my potential involvement like a job interview. It's been 3 weeks since that conversation. I haven't returned to the forums. I haven't used the contact information they gave me. I've avoided running anywhere near that area of the canal. But I haven't called the police either, because part of me knows they were right about one thing. I had been researching their activities with genuine fascination, not just horror. I had been drawn to the forbidden knowledge, the glimpse into darkness that most people never see. They hadn't completely misread my motivations, and because another part of me knows that if they were sophisticated enough to identify and track me through forum activity, they're probably sophisticated enough to monitor whether I contact authorities. The choice they offered me probably wasn't as simple as they made it sound. I still check my usual websites. I still go to work at the library. I still run along different sections of canal, avoiding the area near Trafford Park. I try to maintain normal routines and convince myself that the whole experience was some sort of elaborate hoax or misunderstanding. But sometimes, late at night, I find myself thinking about Viewer One's invitation, about what exactly I might learn if I satisfied my curiosity completely, about whether the line between observer and participant is as clear as I'd always assumed. The secure messaging app is still installed on my phone. The encrypted contact information is still saved in my notes. Every Saturday evening, I find myself wondering what choice I'm actually going to make.